Geek. Talking baseball every week. Cause they're Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek, the No More Injuries edition. I'm John Bonnes from Twins Daily. With me, Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic.
We're going to be
a perfectly healthy team next year.
Yeah, but not us. We're both injured. I walked in. John's got his knee iced up, and I think I broke my foot somehow. You know, it's bad when I have no reason to believe I hurt my foot, but I stepped out of bed this morning to come over here. It's Friday morning, and my first step,
and all the activities that you would blame it on happened a day before.
Yes.
It didn't happen yesterday.
And
it happened Wednesday.
No alcohol involved.
It's Friday morning, by the way.
I have no good excuse for this. I stepped out of bed, planted on my right foot, and I was like, oh, my foot's broken. That's good. And I'm limping around, and I come limping into John's room. He's got a big ice pack around his knee, and I'm like, jeez. And so, yeah, no more injuries edition.
We should, who we should ask to take a look at that?
Nick Paparesta.
Yeah, that's right.
Which, great name for a trainer.
So much better if it was Nick Paparesta.
No, but Resta, because he's into resting players.
Well, that's
Paparesta.
I guess Paparesta.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
So the Twins have.
I'm just saying, if you're singing, a singer, Paparesta is a great name.
Maybe there's already somebody.
there might be
a great reggae.
Isn't there a Papa Roach?
There is a Papa Roach. I wouldn't necessarily describe him as great, but yeah, some people feel that way, I guess. He's not great. I don't want to say that. Papa, if you're out there listening, sorry about that. We never know who's listening. That's the thing with this show. We learned that over the years, even in the early days of blogging, when you'd write about some random prospect or some player, their wife or sister or cousin
or mom or dad.
Well, yeah, I had a few that were like really, really interesting. I had a Tony Batista family member at one time was upset. Jason Kubel's relatives, not upset, but they would chime in. I remember Pat Neshek's wife one time emailed me. She was very nice. There's a few other I'm probably forgetting. So yeah, Papa Roach, we don't know anything about him.
No.
Could be the world's biggest Twins fan. Probably not though. Yeah. There aren't that many celebrity Twins fans if you think about it. It's Nick Swarsden.
Well, yeah, that's right. Yeah, he's all things Minnesota sports.
Yeah.
You're right.
Like Nick's brother John is like third on the celebrity Twins just because he's part of that family.
Similarly to our discussion about 3 months ago, when we asked for any clergy who were Twins fans to let us know. Make sure that if you're a celebrity, that you reach out to gleemanandgeek@gmail.com and let us know that we got more than, or if you just know some celebrity Twins, celebrities who are Twins fans, even if they're not listening.
Well, Josh Duhamel.
Yeah, right.
I'd say everybody's name wrong. He's a celebrity Twins fan.
Yeah, you're not. You're the culture. You're the new culture vulture. No question about it.
We're like, honestly, if we're making a top 5, meat sauce is like 4th or 5th. Which, no offense to Sauce, who we love, but that ain't a great celebrity list. Like you go to Wrigley, they don't do it anymore, but it used to be like every day. It's like, oh, who's doing the 7th inning stretch? Oh, today it's Eddie Vedder. Tomorrow it's Jeff Garland. The day after that, it's like, who do we got? Sauce back, meat sauce back again. Marnie, who works for the Twins, has become like one of their bigger celebrities. So yeah.
I was just thinking.
But yes, email us if you're a celebrity.
Right.
Just think of the bar of what level of celebrity would you have to be to email us? That's the thing.
That's the thing. You have to judge yourself as a celebrity.
Yeah, that's tricky.
You kind of calling yourself out.
Like John,
you know who I am.
The podcast is over. John goes into his office there and emails himself. Hey, I'm John Bonnes. I'm a big Twins fan. You're like top 10, John. Honestly, we should do a power rank. It's like Josh Duhamel, John Bonnes. Yeah, that's it. You guys have been on quite a few lists. You guys were on People's Most Sexiest Men.
We just have to take a look at the Grey Duck Deck celebrity bartender list. That's it. That's the top 10.
That's true. It's like Chad Greenway.
That's right.
Lindsey Gensel. You. That's funny. Yeah, Marnie. She did it.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Chris Hockey. Mark Parrish.
Well, now you're just naming people from the morning show at KFAN, which I suppose is accurate. Well, that is my most celebrity encounters have come probably because of that show. One year, I went in there. This had to be like 10. It was when I used to do the morning show. I was like their Twins guy. Yeah, right. Before I decided I couldn't get up early, and then John Wally pipped me or Lou Gehrig me. But one day I went in there, and I used to go in there like once a week for an hour or whatever. and the guest before me was Joe Rogan, who had not become a super podcaster.
Right.
He was just
he would call in.
He was there.
Really?
Yes, because they would get whatever comedian was in town
play
like Acme or play like. And so
he wasn't there every week. He was there one week.
Just this one day I rolled in. Two things I remember. One is the overwhelming smell of pot in the studio and outside of the studio with him and like his 3 buddies or whatever
sure.
at the time. But he was a actor and comedian.
Sure.
But like he wasn't.
He was radio.
Now he's like a superstar, obviously. But in our industry, he's at the top of our industry, the podcasting industry. We're second to Joe Rogan. Then Mark Maron's third. But I remember that. And then I also remember like he was supposed to have been on for like 20 minutes, an hour previous, but he was just having fun hanging out with them.
Okay.
And I remember Hawkey, who was their producer, but he's also one of the 3 guys on the morning show. He was like, listen, we love you. We really do. But, you're you, he's him. We don't need you today. And he goes, here are your options. I give you like $20. You go down to D. Bryan's and have breakfast and come back in like an hour. And if he's gone, you can come on the air or you can just go home. And I said, I'll take the breakfast. I remember that. And I went and I ate his breakfast. I gave him
burrito.
I gave him breakfast burrito. Of course, you know me.
Great breakfast.
I gave him change. And then I think I just went home after that anyway. So I just got the breakfast. So shout out to Joe Rogan, who got me a free breakfast burrito. And now just by default, Joe Rogan, one of the bigger celebrity Twins fans, just because he's been on the radio.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
I don't know what the point
We'll
of
have you on the podcast anytime you want to come on, Joe.
Yeah, I don't know. He's controversial these days.
He is controversial.
So the Twins hired a new head trainer, Nick Paparesta. I hope we're saying that correctly. It could be Paparesta. I don't know what it is. But.
I should know because I listened to the video of him.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
You've done more work on this than I did.
But I just didn't pay that much attention.
Who spent the last 12 years in the same position, head trainer with the Oakland A's.
Right.
We should look up their year by year.
Yeah, we should.
Injury days lost.
My
sense is that they're not the healthiest team, but I don't know. The problem with judging the A's injuries is because they don't have that many highly paid veteran stars ever. All they have is like minimum salaried 23-year-olds year after year for the most part with the A's. So it's hard to judge. Like they don't have many Josh Donaldson types or any Byron Buxton types. So you can't go, the guy they pay the most money to missed 3 months. They don't pay money to anybody.
Right.
But he's won trainer of the year, all that stuff. And also it was interesting. I always look for what is the link to anyone they hire, any player they hire, any front office staff or any coaching head trainer. What is the link either to the Cleveland Guardians, previous to that Indians, the Texas Rangers for Thad Levine, the Guardians for Falvey, or the Tampa Bay Rays for Rocco Baldelli. And sure enough,
he's got links to at least 2 of them.
In 2009, he started his training career, it sounds like, with the Tampa Bay Rays, where he was on the same staff as Rocco Baldelli. Or Rocco Baldelli was a player at that point.
I think had an internship or something like that with Cleveland just before that, too.
Worked in the Guardians organization for 11 seasons, including 4 years at AAA Buffalo.
I'm having trouble because he actually walks through it in the video. At Twins Daily, the story about this, there's a 12-minute video. It's basically a blogger or podcaster in Oakland who does lots of interviews with various A's, ended up doing a 12-minute interview with Nick Paparesta.
Yeah. Well, maybe
and as a result, and I mean, it's not a real deep dive interview in that, like, they don't start talking about philosophies or all that stuff. It's mostly like, what did you do to get here? What is your background? Right. And as I recall, the original one was he started as like an intern or something with Cleveland to the point where he left school with unfinished to go work there for a while, then came back to school finished, then went with Tampa for a couple years, then a long time with Cleveland, then a long time with Oakland, right. Yeah. I think that's right. He's 49 years old.
So he's just missing the Texas Rangers to get the trifecta of the Thad Levine, Derek Falvey, Rocco Baldelli trifecta. Also from Fort Myers, Florida, which is like a whole extra thing.
Yeah, he's from where he's originally from North Fort Myers.
Complex is.
And he talks a fair amount in that video about, what I think the question is sort of like, what did you not understand about being a trainer when you decided you wanted to become a trainer?
Yeah.
And his point was sort of like, it's a lot of time. I mean, just a lot of time. Like you get there before the players, you're there way after the players. Like it's just a ton of time. And he's got a wife and he's got kids. And I would not be surprised if part of the reason of this kind of lateral move for him, right?
Yeah.
Right, is, I mean, it's certainly a lateral move in terms of title.
Yes,
right.
But I think the Oakland A's are a bit of a mess at the moment.
I would agree,
and are not known for paying people real well in general.
Right, but he's been there 12 years. I think part of it is spring training for Oakland.
Ooh, John needs a trainer.
Yeah, spring training for Oakland is in Arizona. Spring training for the Twins and the off season is in Fort Myers,
right. Especially when you're the rehab coordinator. Not that that's BS title, but you're in charge of that. We've talked about this for a long time, but when Kenta Maeda was working his way back from Tommy John, he was in Fort Myers, Florida. When Randy Dobnak was working his way through finger injury, he's in Fort Myers, Florida. So that's their base in a lot of ways, more so than the Twin Cities for the organization. Right. I mean, they have more players in Fort Myers than they ever have in Minneapolis on a given day during the season. Because they also have the minor league side there, which they have their high A team or their low A team now, plus their complex leagues and stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think you got the Fort Myers angle, you got the Cleveland angle, you got the Tampa Bay angle. I'm sure once upon a time, maybe as a child, he owned a Texas Rangers hat, so that hits that trifecta. It's a hard thing to. We talk about this with coaching changes and stuff. It's impossible to attempt to meaningfully quantify this type of thing, or even say, before we get a chance to talk to him and all that, like, what are the changes going to be? What is he known for as a trainer? You can just sort of go with, well, he was a head trainer for 12 years with one of the more successful organizations relative to payroll. Right. And certainly the A's have been a winning team for most of that time. Not at the moment, but, they're certainly a sabermetrically, analytically, new school friendly organization, as were Cleveland, as were Tampa Bay, all that stuff. So I don't know. It's an interesting hire. I think it fits what they were talking about when we talked to Falvey 3 weeks ago, something like that. What was the end of the season, roughly? It was 3-4 weeks ago.
Something like that.
He said, we're going to go outside the organization. We're going to find someone with experience. We're not looking to find necessarily some diamond in the rough 24-year-old and promote him to this job. And they certainly found a guy with a ton of experience. I mean, he's got to be one of the longest tenured head trainers in baseball. And even the timeline that he set on it, he said basically we would like to finish by the start of the offseason because, Nick Paparesta now is going to be a big part of medical evaluations.
Right. Yep.
And you don't want him either not there at all or just getting, on his feet when you're at a position where you go, what do you think about this pitcher we might trade for or something like that?
They also, frankly, need some some of their offseason moves might depend a little bit on how some of their players are doing. Yeah. Like if they've got a good feel for Royce Lewis and that he can still be able to play shortstop.
Or somebody needs to set up Tyler Malley's throwing program.
Exactly. Shoulder strengthening exercises to make sure that everybody's going to be comfortable.
So you have a new trainer, Nick Paparesta replaces Michael Salazar, who was in the role for 3 years. It's our understanding, I mean, we'll see, that the rest of the training staff, the assistants and then on the way down to the lower level folks are staying the same. But that's one of those things that, if he's got an assistant he wants to bring with him, I'm sure they're going to be open to that. So we might find out a little bit more about that in the coming days. The other big news out on the streets, people were abuzz as I was limping my way over here. When the Phillies won, like 2 seconds after the last out of the NLCS, I texted John and I said, "You're going, right?" Because Chrissy, who's a multi-time guest in the sense that she's frequently heard yelling things off microphone.
And maybe later today, by the way.
Yeah, we'll see if we woke her up. Is from Philly, and John has spent a lot of time in Philly. It's, certainly your number 2 team. It's
for sure.
Would you say it's her number 1 team?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so the Twins are her number. But we've talked a lot about the Phillies over the years, and you're always in
it's
Philly.
Not close.
Yeah, for her.
Right.
And so initially John was like, he shocked me. Because you guys aren't known for, I'm going to try to phrase this in a positive way. Because I'm not saying it negatively. But you guys aren't known for, you went to London on like a day notice. to go see the Vikings.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're not known for...
We are known to act somewhat impulsively.
Yeah, and also you love to travel and just go to cities
Sure.
and do stuff, whereas I don't like to go anywhere.
Right.
So
Right.
I thought he was going to say, oh, way ahead of you. We already got the hotel booked. And
Right.
Or I honestly thought you were going to be like, oh, yeah, I just got here. I'm here now. I'm ready for the World Series. Instead, he was like, I don't know. Well, I'll talk to you about it later. And I was shocked.
Yeah.
I thought, should we do a GoFundMe for him? Should I kidnap him and put him on a plane? Like, what needs to happen?
Right.
And then in the coming days, I repeated this thing over and over. And we were talking to our friend Dan Hayes was on the show on the Patreon podcast. In fact, we're going to play a little clip later on the show. We should
mention that.
About that. Dan was on. We did like a supersized episode. We were like an hour and 30 minutes in, and we had like 8 more things to cover. And we were like, oh man, this is long.
Like 2 of the
it was a good
questions.
episode, though.
Yeah,
so that's patreon.com.
Very free flowing.
/Gleeman. But he through him and his connections, John got access to some tickets that freed up. And the news is
we're going.
You're going.
Oh yeah,
to all 3. Hopefully 3.
All 3 games.
3,
Monday,
4, 5.
Yeah, hopefully 3
of
games.
the 7-game series.
Yeah. Hopefully 3. Actually, it'd be fine if the Phillies just swept them in 4. That'd be fine.
Sure, that's the most likely outcome.
That'd be fine.
That'd be amazing. Imagine they just stomp them. Like 4 blowouts, it's over.
That's right.
Yeah.
We will. What this means to you, dear listener, is we will probably not be doing
a Patreon during the week.
We'll probably not be doing a Patreon next week, and frankly, your next Twins broadcast free one might wait until a week from Tuesday. See. It might be it might be a little late.
If John gets stuck climbing up a telephone pole in Philly.
I am bringing the podcast stuff along in case we want to do here's what it's like winning a World Series podcast or something like that.
There's Philadelphia's own Christine Bonus right now.
That's right. Yeah.
I don't know why I said his full name.
We are talking World Series, yes.
Yeah. John said they're going to sweep them. 4-0. You won't even see the 5th game. He said, yeah, just letting you know.
The Phillies, I said, would sweep.
Yeah, she knows. You would not say the opposite because she'll murder you before you get on the plane. So yeah, John's going to be in Philly. That's exciting. I'm excited for you because I feel like...
Well, it will be interesting for me to go back to a city, what it's like to be in a city during a championship. Do you know what I mean? And I mean a championship for that city, not the Super Bowl like it was 3-4 years ago, but like, in
the city where it's happening.
The last time I remember a, finals being in Minneapolis that, was involved the team was probably the North Stars in 91, 92. Well, I think it was right after the Twins.
Stanley Cup Finals, 91. Yeah, I don't remember.
Maybe not.
I was little.
Maybe that was before the final. Maybe that was before the Twins. I think that might have been before the Twins.
The Vikings have had title games, NFC title games here, obviously.
Right.
At least 1 that I know, 2 that I know of.
Right, yeah.
But that's different. Yeah, because there's the build up to it. There's all that stuff. Because you're going to be getting there while they're in Houston playing the first 2 games, basically. So the morale of the city.
Well, actually, no. We will get there on the off day in between. We're sticking around here for Friday and Saturdays, game 1 and game 2.
Because I feel like it could be anything. You get off that plane and they're down 2-0.
Right.
And it's just batteries being slung. Or they could be up 2-0 and it's just batteries being slung.
Are you suggesting that Philly might overreact one way or the other?
It's either way. It's going to be a war zone. When they start lubing up the telephone poles in a city, and that's like a known thing, when it's like, get the lube, people are climbing the I feel like that's a hell of a city. It really is. I'm jealous. I liked Philly. I've been there twice.
I am really excited.
Not for years and years, but I like it.
And then they were actually staying through the following week, even though we only got tickets through Wednesday. We're staying through the following weekend, in part because my son goes to school there and it's his parents' weekend that weekend. We were going to go for parents' weekend, but now that we're there anyway, we're not going to actively leave.
They say, a lot of people say to me, what are the Bonneses like? And let me tell you, their kid goes to school in Philly. They would never go to parents' weekend, but they're going to be there for the World Series. So they thought,
so we're not actually leaving.
We'll stay for
just
the kids.
Prior to parents'
I bet
weekend.
he's thrilled about that.
But but there's also some advantage to that. Like if there is a game 6 and a game 7.
Yeah, you can watch it at a bar in Philly.
Watch it at a bar in Philly, which is the second best way. We debated should we try and go to Houston?
Yeah.
And we're like, where would you rather watch game 6 or 7? Would you rather watch it in the stadium in Houston where they could potentially win it? Or would you rather watch it in a bar in Philadelphia? And the answer is a bar in Philadelphia.
Here's the expert opinion.
he's totally jinxing it right now, and there won't be a Game 6 or a Game 7, and not in a good way, and you're killing it.
All right. Yeah, you see?
Well,
this is why there was some hesitation to go to Philadelphia. I'm sure of it. Like, she was not really pushing at all to go to Philadelphia.
I was surprised.
That was the surprising part. And I think it's because she didn't want to jinx it.
I think it's because she didn't want to go Parents' Weekend. What do you think about that? It's annoying. She was like, if we do that, we're going to get stuck going to the college.
She's the one who is open to Parents' Weekend.
Oh, you didn't want to go? I can't. That's how I know I could never be a father. Which is the idea of that is just repulsive to me. Like the idea of going to student teacher conference or parent teacher conferences.
Right.
I mean, which is not a hard thing.
Just so we're clear, it's also repulsive to my son.
Well, yeah, he doesn't like it.
Right? Like, he's not like, oh, are you going to miss Parents' Weekend?
No, he probably didn't even tell you about it.
Exactly.
I used to not tell my mom about parent-teacher conferences because I knew they wouldn't be good for me if she showed up to them. They weren't going to go, your son's the greatest, most charming student we've ever had. No, they'd be like, oh, it's a good thing you're here. He's an idiot. Let us tell you what he's been doing.
This is the boys' reaction to Parents' Weekend. Well, I think I can probably guarantee you maybe a lunch and a dinner.
Yeah, that's plenty.
In any 3-day span.
That's plenty. I mean, really, what more do you need than that? So yeah, that's John's gonna be in Philly, but you'll get your normal fill of, there's gonna be some Twins news as soon as the World Series ends.
Sure.
Correa is going. You may want to sit down for this, people, but Correa is going to opt out of this contract. They also have 4 option decisions on Sonny Gray, Miguel Sano,
yes.
Chris Archer, and Dylan Bundy.
Right.
I mean, I can tell you they're going to pick up Sonny Gray's option and decline the other 3.
Right.
But those can't even happen until the final pitch of the World Series, and then you have a 5-day period, depending if it's on a weekend or not. But you have a 5-day period where it's going to happen. So as soon as the World Series ends, probably the next day or by Monday, you're going to get official transactions from the Twins. And then in addition to that, all the actual free agents, Gary Sanchez, Michael Fulmer, guys like that, they just automatically get removed from the roster on day 1 of the offseason. So that's when the offseason really begins. But until then, for teams like the Twins, or for 28 teams now, it's this weird dead zone where it's like it's technically the most important part of the baseball season right now, but it only involves 2 out of the 30 teams and front offices and everything. So everyone else is just sort of planning and knowing that they're about to release the floodgates on 300 free agents, basically, but you can't.
And making some calls about potential trade candidates, that sort of thing, right?
So, but until then, we don't have that much to
We should mention that clip that we're going to play in the middle of this is all about Carlos Correa.
Yes. So
it is basically Dan Hayes lobbying. I think it's if you're picking the clip, I think you picked. It's basically Dan Hayes lobbying to re-sign Carlos Correa.
We had Dan on a couple days ago. It was like a 2-hour show. It was great. And we heard from a bunch of Patreon subscribers who listened to it, who loved it, and I would encourage everyone to go listen to it. You can sample it for free if you want on patreon.com/Gleeman right now, because the archive is free.
That's right.
So there's no reason not to check it out. Go sign up, but we'll play you a little 10-minute teaser, basically. But yeah, we talked about a ton of stuff, like the number of what I would call juicy tidbits that were dropped first and foremost by Dan, but also just conversationally with me and Dan or John and Dan saying like, oh, remember this? When you bring in, John and I talk to each other 3 times a week. When you bring in an outside entity to that, it unlocks different stories and different memories.
For sure.
So I would be shocked if you could listen to that episode as a Twins fan and not come away with 10 new bits of information, including some stuff about Correa, some speculation about Urshela and Kepler and some of the decision points, and some of the stuff we're going to talk about today in terms of what their off-season needs are. But yeah, we did in the middle of the show, we did 30 plus minutes about Correa, about what the Twins' plan with him is, what his market actually will be in terms of 7 years, 9 years, 12 years, 200 million, 300 million. We talked about all that stuff. We talked about how the Twins will approach it. And there was in the middle of that were a little of me and a lot of Dan talking about what we witnessed from him behind the scenes in terms of a leadership component and an intelligence component and, being into analytics and trying to help other players. In a lot of ways, I comped him to Paul Molitor in that way.
Yeah. Yep.
And so that's part of the discussion. But yeah, we pulled a little 10-minute clip of that. So if you enjoy that, you can go listen to a whole 2-hour episode on patreon.com. But yeah, otherwise, I mean, it's been pretty light on news. I mean, they haven't made any more 40-man moves since the last time we spoke. Although there's a couple of those coming, I'm told.
Okay.
But we'll probably talk about that, I guess, on next week's show. The trainer is significant, but like we said a minute ago, like it's not necessarily. I mean, that's
it's a hard thing to talk about.
Right, it's a crucial hire,
right?
And getting the difference between getting it right and getting it wrong is huge. But it's not really something you can dive into initially and be like, oh, here's why I think this is going to be good. Here's why I think this is going to be bad. Here's what to look for.
I'll tell you one thing I do like about it. I mean, I do like the fact that they went outside the organization. Now, that's been their modus operandi in general because they just think they can get the talent. But beyond the talent, pulling from it, I like that they are trying to inject a different organization's culture and our methods and our processes into something that, for whatever reason, hasn't been working.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. A lot. I mean, listen, I think a lot of what he does is real hands-on, right? But I think a lot of what he does is also high-level management. And
right. Well, a lot of it's just like conceptual, right? Like it's like, here's how we are going to approach this type of thing. And then it's also assigning duties to the people below you. Yeah. But even more than that, it's, putting in place a way of operating that things don't fall through the cracks maybe as much as they did with the previous regime in terms of individual players or just how we handle preventative stuff, how we handle kind of day-to-day stuff, how we handle when they're out of pocket, when a player goes home for the offseason, how do we keep tabs on them? How do we kind of send them out into the world with a good plan and not have them show up to Fort Myers 4 months from now and everyone go, oh crap, he's not ready to go.
One of the things that came through listening to his interview, and it's just, I mean, he didn't dwell on it, so I would really like to dive into this with him, actually. But he referenced it, is that, there's a lot of voices in the room when you're a trainer. I mean, there's certainly the player, right? Here's what I'm feeling, here's what I'm not feeling, right? There's also like the player's agent.
Right.
I mean, that is probably trying to apply pressure in various ways for various things, right?
Which in the Twins case, it's always Scott Boras.
right.
It's Lewis's agent.
I mean, and you've got the coach and you've got the front office and there's just a lot of people. You're reporting to a lot of people. I mean, ultimately, you're
getting pulled in a lot of directions.
You're being pulled in a lot of directions, right? I mean, there's the obvious pull, which is sort of like, oh, the team is paying my salary, but the player is sort of my ultimate boss in terms of what I'm trying to do.
The player is kind of your client.
Right.
But it's like they work for this bigger organization a little bit.
So there's a natural tug of war there, which we've seen all kinds of, in past years, especially like in the NFL, the ethical dilemmas that can come into play with that, right? But I mean, there's just a lot of other tertiary voices as well. Like I said, the agents or the front office or the coaching staff or other players, etc. And I mean, especially when you've got a situation like the Twins, where seemingly everybody has training needs. You know what I mean?
Just the manpower,
the bandwidth, the bandwidth that you have to handle all of that.
Right, you come
is
in
by itself.
You go walk into the trainer's room,
right,
and there's 44 guys back there, waiting to get iced up and waiting to get massaged and waiting to discuss with you their rehab plan.
Right,
and it's like, oh, I got 2 assistants. I could use 9 assistants right now. Yeah. So I don't know. I think it's as impactful potentially. I'm not going to say he's as important as Carlos Correa or anything like that, but it's as impactful as the majority of kind of off-season acquisitions you could make, but it's really just a black box. Like, it's really just, you can't know. I mean, even after the fact with Michael Salazar, like, obviously they fired him and they had an incredible number of injuries, so the assumption is he didn't do his job up to standard.
Right.
But we don't know that. I mean, I suspect that, but it could have just been bad luck. Maybe this guy will have good luck, but maybe this guy won't.
Yeah, and it is especially a black box to those people with credentials.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
I would say it's a black box to people in the industry.
Right. Well,
like
I think that's probably true.
Like to the trainers and to the, I mean, there's just a lot of it that you can't know.
Right.
Because it's not as, there is luck involved. I mean, there's luck involved in this guy strained his hamstring. You can do everything you want. but the body is going to determine, is this guy back in 4 weeks or is this guy back in 8 weeks?
Right. My point is sort of like that even people with credentials are not, in the training room, not seeing what's going on, that there are medical privacy concerns.
Sure.
That supersede, the credentials and access, and of the areas that we have access to, even when we're down there, that's the area that you have the least access to.
You mean media credentials? Like you mean a press pass?
Yes.
I thought you meant the people with credentials, as in the people with degrees in training.
No.
He has, what are his credentials?
I actually think it might be interesting sometime. I wonder what the public perception is.
Credentials, that's funny. It's a double meaning. Let me tell you, people with media credentials, we don't know shit about anything, John. So you're right about that.
Right, exactly right. Yeah, I mean, I think it might be an interesting Patreon episode sometime for us to do. We do deep dives into stuff on the Patreon. It might be interesting to do sort of like, what is the day in a life of a media person? Like, what do you have access to? Who can you talk to? Like, I think people think, I don't think they understand the structure that is in place to sort of,
it's very,
to establish boundaries from which
structured.
I mean,
in terms of when you can be there, where you can go, what you can say,
how many people you really get to talk to, when you
can't go into the training. I mean, famously at the Metrodome, if a guy like Joe Mauer or Justin Morneau or whoever wasn't real keen on talking to the media, they would be in the training room. Right. Because, and that happens now also, where it's like, well, okay, what do you say to that? It's like if someone calls in, you go, you get a text from your employee and they're like, I can't come into work today. I'm sick.
Right.
Well, you can't really be like, I'm going to come over there and I'm going to take your temperature. I'm going to see, like, are you sick? No, It's like, you're sick. We're in the training room. We can't like burst back there. But yes, it's a domain of, I mean, honestly, the only people, it's funny, I'm thinking about this now, the only people that those of us with a press pass can really kind of trample on their workspace are the players.
Right.
Now, we go into Baldelli's, the manager's office pregame, but you can't just stroll in there anytime you want. Like postgame, if you just stroll in the ball, I mean, you can poke your head in and ask them something or whatever. Yeah, right. But postgame, the understanding is there are certain areas you can go into the clubhouse to the players section, but you can't go to the back room where they got catering and the training room and the showers and all that stuff, and you can't then go into Baldelli's office. It's very structured in terms of, it's like going through a maze. But there are only certain doors open at 10 a.m. The other doors, that door is then closed at 2 p.m., but a different door is open. And so, there's a lot of stuff, which is why, I mean, we talked about this actually on the last free show, I guess. The notion of having done it now for a few years, and this was my first year with full clubhouse access, I've learned that a lot of my preconceived notions about that were false.
Right.
But I've also learned that my kind of spidey sense as a blogger for many years, when people who had that access long before me made this huge deal about knowing things kind of above and beyond what you can see in the box score and what you can see from interviews and stuff, like knowing kind of the heartbeat of the team because they're in the clubhouse and all that. Well, then you see, what are they really talking about? They get to go in there for 40 minutes pregame when everyone knows they're coming.
BS.
It's BS.
I would say most of that quote unquote heartbeat, or even a lot of what is valuable in terms of background knowledge or even, pieces of news to kind of watch, or, if you talk to somebody, you talk to a journalist they don't want to write this down because they don't want to publish it, but they'll give you something like that.
Yeah.
I would say most of that is done by gossiping via text.
Yeah, well, certainly in 2022, that's the case.
It is not done because you've got access or credentials.
Right. I mean, I don't think, when Patrick Royce was a beat writer, that obviously wasn't.
Right, exactly.
It was done on Barstools.
Right.
Over the same way. Right. And he would tell you the same. He's told me the same many times.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's right. I mean, but I should also note that there are people with clubhouse access who are just much better at it than I am.
Absolutely.
So I'm not suggesting everyone has the limits that I do in terms of getting information and knowing the heartbeat of the team. But it is funny to me that, I spent 20 years reading columnists who were talking about, I know this guy's a team leader and this guy's and you'll hear Dan Hayes and I talking about some of that with Correa in the clip we're going to play. But I'll be the first to admit that's just what we saw in the time we were in the clubhouse.
It is a fraction.
Now, maybe the door's closed and he says, oh, thank God they're gone.
A lot of eye rolling.
And he starts, hitting the rookies with paddles or something. I don't know what's going on. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what's going on.
Breaking news.
Carlos Correa paddling rookies. Maybe that's what they're into. You never know. Right. Before we talk about
some off-season
needs.
Right.
Let's talk about our newest sponsor, which I'm very excited to add them as a sponsor.
Yes.
Because we
already use them.
Hopefully,
again, this is one of those where we already are clients.
Hopefully it's clear to people who've been listening to the show for a long time. Now, we've added a lot of sponsors because the show's popular. Thank you guys for that. But we've also turned down, I don't want to say many, but a fair number of potential sponsors that we either don't see the value in as a product, or we've used it and sometimes they've sent it to us and it's not a good product.
Right.
And maybe I'm just silly about this, but I do feel like a weird sense of responsibility to the audience because we love our audience. We love you guys. To be like, I don't want to try to sell them snake oil. You know what I mean? Like, to make a few $100 or something like that, I don't want to do that. And so we turn down stuff all the time. Beyond that, there's once in a while, we get an opportunity to advertise a product or a place or something that we love. For instance, the Baseball Reference Play Index. I've been using that for 10 years. I'm thrilled to have added them as a sponsor.
RotoWire was a similar
Same way.
one.
Because we're saying, look, not only are we saying this is a good product, I've been paying for this product for a decade. This is an example of that. Our newest sponsor is 7th Avenue Pizza.
Right.
Which I have eaten a billion of over the years.
I was just thinking,
the other day.
I have probably eaten a dozen since the start of football season, or had it a dozen times since the start of football season, either between having it here, like I love
or
cooking
the morning
on my
show.
Grill.
When you go to K-Fan, there's usually a hot
often
one.
at the morning show, they often will make
They
one.
have a pizza maker, like a special oven that does it.
That's right. Or here's the other one. I probably have eaten it more this way. Tailgates.
Yeah.
Because they end up bringing free pizzas to the tailgate because the tailgate is, sponsoring a charity. Basically, donate some money to this charity, and now you can have some beer.
They're very big
you can have some pizza and
local, and I would say upper Midwest charities. I know they're doing
Gophers tailgates, Vikings tailgates.
I know the
Nadine
Crohn's,
Bamboo
Foundation.
Crohn's Foundation.
They donate a lot to. They're
and then
huge with that. And just in general, if you've never had 7th Street Pizza
and a cancer stuff,
great frozen pizza that you can find at Lunds and Byerly's. You can find it at I think Holiday gas station, most local places. They're a local place, locally sourced ingredients, and it's just a really good frozen pizza.
And now, this week,
if you go to Lunds and Byerly's, all week, not just their usual BOGO Tuesday for pizza, which I've loaded up on in the past. All week they have BOGO 7th Street Pizza, and let me tell you, no BS. Within the last 3 months, before they were a sponsor, I've bought BOGO 7th Street Avenue pizzas at Lunds. I live very close to a Lunds. So you can do it all week.
We've got a couple in our freezer right now.
There's no promo code Gleeman or anything like that. Just hit up Lunds. Or wherever you are, grab 7th Street Pizza. You might be able to find one with meat sauce's face on the packaging. Whether you view that as a pro and a con, of course,
that is a good variety because his is on the meatball and pepperoni.
Yeah, I
pizza,
hope it's meat sauce based something.
Meatball.
But you can get it at Lunds and Byerly's, Kowalski's, Coburn's, Hy-Vee, Holiday, Cooper's, Hornbacher's.
But Lunds and Byerly's this week, go get them.
Yeah, and if your store doesn't have it, ask for it because they're local.
Right.
Why not? So 7th Street Pizza. That's our
7th Avenue.
7th Avenue.
Pizza.
I keep saying 7th Street.
It's 7th Avenue.
That's going to be mine. I'm going to make it competitive. 7th Street.
It's going to be your Chris Parmalee.
Just garbage pizza. Just the worst pizza of all time. I'm trying to ride their coattails. Yeah, 7th Ave Pizza. Legitimately very good. My go-to, I like just a pepperoni. But they have some other good ones.
I'll take any of them.
They have a couple that are like spicy
sauce.
Yeah, I like those.
I think most all of them have a little bit of spice.
A little kick to it. So 7th Ave, sorry for saying 7th Street. 7th Avenue Pizza, newest sponsor. Okay. So the main thing we wanted to talk about today is kind of the conclusion of our kind of preparatory off-season stuff, which is, and we do this every year, which you start out.
Here's what they got to do.
You start out right away when they get eliminated, whether it's regular season, first round of the playoffs, whatever it is. You start out saying, all right, what did we just watch?
Right.
What was the good? What was the bad? This year was more bad than good. You say kind of what gets wiped clean just through the process of a new season. Some of that is, free agents leave. Hopefully some guys get healthy. But then beyond that, we did last week, we laid out the payroll situation and the roster situation. What do they have in place?
Yep.
What do they have in place from a monetary standpoint? What kind of room do they have? We determined they have roughly 50 to 60 million to spend, depending on what they do with Gio Urshela, just to kind of get back to the same payroll level they were at this year, which was roughly 140 million, which was 16th out of 30, just exactly league average. Well, then the next step from that, once you lay out kind of what are the decisions to be made, who are the trade candidates, okay, now they got $60 million. We've gone over the roster. We've gone over the injuries. We've gone over kind of the what was good, what was bad this season. Well, now the next natural step is what should they actually try to spend
Where
that on?
are the gaps? Right?
Yeah. What are the, because it's one thing to go, okay, they got $60 million. And you go, well, just give it to Aaron Judge. All $60 million. Yeah, you could do that. But, that's real. It's not realistic. And I don't know that it really addresses enough things. Or you say, just take the $60 million and splice it up 10 ways and sign 10 Dylan Bundy tapes for $5 million a year.
Sure.
Well, that's the flip side. I don't know that does you really any good. So it's more about like zeroing in on, to me at least, zeroing in on, what are the obvious gaping holes first and foremost, and Correa leaves a gaping hole at shortstop, for instance. Then assessing your options there, free agency, trade, internal options, all that stuff. But then beyond that, some of them aren't, a lot of them aren't as clear cut as that. A lot of them are, okay, you have Ryan Jeffers at catcher. Is that a need or is that not a need with Ryan Jeffers at catcher? You have to kind of self-evaluate what you have in place. What's the best role for them? How much do we trust them going forward? Do we need to just bring back Sandy Leon to be his backup? Or are we trying to make Ryan Jeffers the backup? In which case, a starting catcher is a pretty big priority to go for the offseason. Then the pitching, which we talked a lot with Dan about on the Patreon side that you should go listen to, was like, okay, they have 10,000 rotation options if everyone's healthy.
Right.
But if everyone who was injured this year stays injured, they got about like 4.5 rotation options. How much of a priority is that stuff? So to me, it's about identifying the needs, which I think there are like 5 or 6, to me at least, clear-cut ones. John might have a slightly different list. But then beyond that, it's about ranking them, but not just ranking them. It's almost like categorizing them. Because there are some that if you don't address them, you cannot have a baseball team.
Yeah, so
there are others where you want to address it if possible, but if you can't address it, you can trot out what you currently have, and it's not the end of the world. So to me, that's the kind of push and pull of it.
When we do a systems implementation, right? We got to go live with a new production system. Invariably, while you're working on development, you find bugs, you find things that you got to get fixed, right? And you go to your team and you have them all put in everything that they find. The whole testing team goes through it, right? And they put down, here's the things that have got to get fixed, priority. And inevitably, everybody puts their thing they find as a high priority,
right?
Right.
This is a must do,
and so you have a list, and you've got to go through. Okay, here's the things that we got to fix. How are we really going to prioritize this? And basically, there's a million ways, different ways to do it. One of the ways that I often do it is sort of a high, medium, and low. And the high is this. You simply can't go live on the date that you're going to go live with this way. It is not functional without this. That is high priority. If it's not that, it's not a high priority, right? If it is something that you can live with, right? Well, then it's a low priority. Like if we can go live with this and it's okay, we can go live, we can either push it off later or whatever, then that's low priority. And the medium priority is like, I guess we could go live without it, but boy, you're debating it. You're debating it at the very least as to whether or not this can go live without it, right? And that's sort of that's how you take what everybody says is high priority and really divide into what is truly high, what is truly medium, and sort of what is truly low, right? And that's the way I took a look. I've got 6 needs.
Okay.
Right?
I have 5.
Okay. And I've got 1 high.
Okay.
I've got 1 medium and I've got 4 low.
Okay.
So I'll be interested to see what you got.
I love when John
tries
to lay things out in a business terms to me. A person who is about to turn 40 years old and has never really held a normal job in his entire life, and never will. Let's be honest. It's not like corporate America's banging down my door at this point, where John's like, listen,
we almost had you one a few years ago.
Yeah, how'd that go? But I like when John's like, listen, we're implementing this for product rollout. And I'm like, what is that? Yeah, totally, man. Totally. I agree with that. Me personally, I sit on my couch and type things into my laptop about a baseball team. That's how I get paid. But, so yeah.
I will be interested to see which ones you got as high, medium.
Yeah, I guess I didn't quite, I can categorize them like that. So I guess,
I think we both have the same high.
I mean, because to me, at least one high. I hinted at it, but like, going off what you said about non-baseball things, to me, the one that is, flashing red light, number one, top of the list, in your terminology, you cannot roll out the product.
Right.
I remember Bob Uecker used to say, catcher's the most important position. I'm not going to say catcher. I'm just using this because without it, the ball just goes to the backstop every time. I thought that was funny.
That's right.
Shortstop. They don't have a shortstop. There is no one currently in the organization that could feasibly be, that they would be find palatable as an opening day shortstop. Once Correa opts out, we're assuming he's technically still in the organization. And so to me, you need a shortstop because otherwise every ground ball hit to the 6 hole is going to roll into left field.
It's not going to be Jorge Polanco. All right. I mean, or Nick Gordon.
It's not going to be Nick Gordon. You can talk all you want. Royce Lewis is halfway through a 12-month recovery for ACL, his second ACL surgery.
Right.
Austin Martin is a shortstop at AA, but he's not ready. Right. Brooks Lee was just drafted, could be a shortstop, is not ready. They just lost Jermaine Palacios on waivers. If you had any sense that he was going to be the opening, there is not an opening.
You wanted a 184 hitting shortstop?
Wow. How dare you, John? Kick the man when he's leaving, when he's out the door.
I like him. I do.
Great hair. I remember when Doe and I were in Fort Myers in the clubhouse, just standing around, and Palacios came in like early in February, or I guess March it was, and we were like, man, he looks like a corporate banker. Instead of a shortstop.
Okay.
Just had the great kind of flowing dark hair.
How did it compare to Astudillo?
Yeah, a little different.
Okay.
Although maybe he's a corporate banker. I don't know, whatever he is. I would trust him with my money, certainly.
Sure. I trust him more than I trust you.
Well, yeah, I don't trust myself with my money. First of all, I need money to be able to trust money. But yeah, so the question, I mean, we're joking about literally not having a shortstop, but number one is you just need a shortstop. Your dog is going nuts here. Does this mean she has to go outside, or she just doesn't like this discussion?
She just wants some food.
Oh. Me too, Shar.
Yeah.
Usually he didn't give either of us breakfast. Yeah, I put in a request. I said I wanted a hash.
She's
brisket.
I think she's gotten to the point where she's old enough that she forgets that she's already had breakfast.
That's what happens to me. That's 20 years of that for me. That's how you end up looking like me, Shar. Don't do that. So, like, part of it is just obviously recognizing that you need a shortstop, but which is obvious. But beyond that, it's like, what is the plan of attack here? First of all, what are the options, which we're going to go over? But then, what is the notion of what we want to try to do with this? Because, and this is the third straight offseason, where we've been sitting here and going, they need a new shortstop. Right. 1 year, they moved Polanco, and they needed a shortstop.
They keep getting a 1 year answer.
Right. Then they, last
and Royce Lewis keeps getting hurt.
Royce Lewis got hurt, and they were like, okay, we'll sign Correa. First, 2 years ago, they signed Simmons to a year.
Right.
Then last year, it was Correa. Well, the hope each time was, by the time this 1 year deal expires, Royce Lewis will be ready to just take over at shortstop. And yeah, he keeps tearing his ACL now twice. And so you're now in your third go around at this. And so you have to figure out, before you can go to step 2 of this thing, you have to figure out, what do we think the likeliest outcome with Royce Lewis is going to be, short term and long term?
Right.
Which is, he's not going to be ready this season before May or June at the absolute minimum. And more likely it's June or July. But, okay, it's one thing to be ready. It's another thing do we think June 1st he's going to be our major league shortstop? Right. And we confident that he's going to be A, fully healthy, B, still have the speed and athleticism and knee strength to be the shortstop? And also, what happens if he has a setback and it's not it's till August? If you think he's going to be healthy, then you can target another 1-year guy. If you think Royce Lewis is not necessarily a lock to be a shortstop this year and beyond, which is certainly in question anytime you have back-to-back knee surgeries and you miss 2.5 years with that, well then, do they change their plan there so much that he's not even necessarily top of mind at shortstop? In which case, does it make you more likely to try to re-sign Correa, or does it make you more likely to say, even if we can't re-sign Correa, we're not going to go the 1-year route. We're then going to turn our attention to Xander Bogaerts or Dansby Swanson, or go trade for
Elvis Andrus.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that would be more of a 1-year thing. But so that to me is the trickiest part of this, is they have to figure out what are their options currently. What do they really, truthfully, deep in their bones feel about Royce Lewis?
Right.
And for that matter, Brooks Lee and Austin Martin.
Sure, yeah.
And then react to that. Or do they take the approach that Falvey talked about when we interviewed him 3 weeks ago, which is, even if we thought that Royce Lewis is a long-term shortstop and Austin Martin is a long-term shortstop and Brooks Lee is a long-term shortstop, that really shouldn't stop us
from going and getting a long-term shortstop.
Viable, good investment to go and to sign a current in their prime all-star shortstop.
Right.
And so all of that rolled into it. But I mean, I think you're going to, agree that that's the biggest priority.
That's the one. That's
okay.
one.
Well,
that's number one.
We agree. Look at that, John.
Yeah. There's no question that is you can't go live without it, without its solution. You've got to go and address the shortstop. Now, I'm not sure that they're necessarily going to address it long term. Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Percentage chance they sign a player to a multi-year deal
to play
shortstop.
No,
I'm saying sign.
Yeah, not trade for. Sign. I would say less than 50-50.
I agree.
Certainly. I think they would
I'm down to a third or maybe like 25%.
I think they would like to do that.
Okay.
I think they're planning as if that's a possibility, but I also think it's
they're going to be a player for one of those top four. That's what they think.
Yes. I think, but it's the Mike Tyson quote, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Like everybody has a plan until you go, oh, there are 4 in their prime all-star shortstops, all available on this free agent market. Let's try to get one of them. And then day one, you call all 4 and they all go, Correa goes, well, I got a $300 million offer from so-and-so. And then Trey Turner says, I got $240 on the table from so-and-so. And Bogaerts is going to re-sign with Boston for $180. And you go, oh, it turns out there's
Giants are coming in strong.
There's no shortstops.
Right, and the Braves are going to hang on to Swanson.
But I think, if they had their way, I think they would like to lock in a star player at that position long term. I think there are definitely questions. I don't think Austin Martin is going to be a major league shortstop. I think, maybe it's 50-50 if Brooks Lee plays shortstop in the majors. And I think there's a higher percent than 50-50 that Royce Lewis is, but no one can possibly know that at that point. And you can move those guys around. And so, I think the biggest offseason need is shortstop, whether it's short term, whether it's long term, whether it's trying to sign a star guy, whether it's trying to make a trade, or whether it's just, look, we try to sign Jose Iglesias or Elvis Andrus or whoever to a 1-year, $8 million deal, and then we kind of just assess this the same way we have the last 3 years. Let's wait for Royce Lewis, and if it's this time next year,
and maybe we have Brooks Lee by then, too,
or we're having this exact same conversation, and we're saying who's the best shortstop on the market. So, I mean, we're in agreement that that's the biggest need. I think
the biggest need, and I mean, as much as we are going to focus on, and I think as much as the team might focus on one of those top 4 guys, I think we both also understand getting any of those 4 guys, not just Correa, but any of them, is unlikely, for lack of a better word.
Let's put it this way. All 4 of those guys, Correa, Trey Turner, Xander Bogaerts, Dansby Swanson, are going to get significantly more than $100 million. The Twins have never signed anyone for $100 million. Correa got $100, but it was a 1-year deal, really. So, and so,
all 4 of those guys, in addition to teams like the Giants or the Mariners or whoever else might be looking for a shortstop, all 4 of those teams would love to re-sign their player. Like that.
Yeah,
The Dodgers the Dodgers don't have a surefire. Here's our shortstop coming up. The Braves don't.
Red Sox switch Trevor Story to shortstop.
But they would love to have Bogarts back.
Yeah. So
I mean, all four of them are, and the Twins. All four of those teams are rumored to be teams in the shortstop market,
right?
Because they're losing a great shortstop, and then on top of that, you've got additional teams.
And the biggest reason that they were able to get Correa last year was the lockout. That's not present now. I mean, we'll see how free spending teams are. I mean, that's yet to be determined, obviously. But I think it's going to be very unlikely that any of those four guys are going to sign for what we, if we do a show the day after one of those four signs, I think it's very unlikely that we go, I cannot believe that's how little
what a deal he got.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be the case. And so anytime that's the case with a free agent, the Twins are by definition unlikely to.
It's a musical chairs, and there's like 7 or 8 teams walking around 4 chairs.
Right.
Right? Like,
yeah, I mean, especially at shortstop. It is very rare that a team is so well positioned at shortstop that they're not interested in one of the top 5 shortstops in baseball. You know what I mean? You have to really, the Mets have Lindor, so they're probably not interested. And there's like 4 or 5 other.
And the Yankees seem to be content with trying to fill it with 1-year deals while they wait for their prospects to come up.
I'm very curious about that because they tried that with Kiner Falefa.
I know.
And by the end of the season, Yankees fans hated him, hated Donaldson, and the team got knocked out in the ALCS. So I would say before we get to the other, I have 4, you have 5.
Yep.
Let's play a little 10, 12-minute clip from the Patreon episode we recorded with Dan Hayes a couple days ago. This is specifically about Carlos Correa, getting into some of the stuff we kind of just hinted at, and Dan's view of the value he brings on the field, but also off the field, Dan's view of like what his market could be, and just kind of his overall sense of having covered one of the best shortstops in the world for the last 6 months and what that means for the Twins going forward. So we'll be back in like 12 minutes to pick up this offseason needs discussion. But first, here's Dan Hayes, John Bonnes, and a young upstart named Aaron Gleeman discussing Carlos Correa.
Not so young anymore.
Carlos Correa is that guy. And having him around is that valuable, even at $35 million a year, even if it means Royce Lewis's path shifts and becomes a third baseman or a second baseman.
So that's what you would do.
I think Correa
you would put a significant chunk of the payroll.
And I agree. If there is such a thing as like a model face of the franchise, it has to be him. Which isn't to say like Buxton can't be that and all that.
No, it's great for Buxton to be the number 2 to him.
Right. And they were clearly very close too. Like I know people saw that even on the broadcast and stuff, but like behind the scenes too, like they were often just shooting the shit in the clubhouse. Like they were, but I mean, he's one of the, I would say, top dozen all around position players in baseball. Correa. He plays the most important, I would argue, position, probably or one of the 2 or 3 most important positions. He's super consistent when healthy.
Yeah.
And all the shit you just talked about, which is if you believe in any of these intangible, ancillary, on the margins, like, okay, he hit an 837 OPS or whatever it was.
Right.
That we can quantify.
Right.
We can't quantify, did he help so-and-so get a hit here, or did he help the defense get position better, or did he? And it's tough. You can't quantify that. But I've never been as certain that someone does contribute in that way as I am with
Fulmer talked
Correa.
about. And I'm going to write this when I do that story, whenever he opts out. Fulmer said, you remember the win at Yankee Stadium? You guys remember the 1-1?
Yeah, Correa,
The win in the last 10 years. Fulmer said Correa came to the mound, and I think it was Gleyber Torres was up, and basically said, hey, he's going to be looking all your slider this whole bat. And Fulmer, I got the interview here on my phone. Fulmer said Correa directed how they were going to pitch to Gleyber Torres.
Right.
And they win that game. They get out of it. And, the shortstop was telling the pitcher, and the pitcher loved it.
Sure.
Like, Fulmer was
that's the thing. They have trust that he actually does know what he's talking about.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, like the finger cost him 12 games.
2 weeks, basically. And
COVID
was 2 weeks.
Aside from that, he played 136 of 142. Of those two, he was an everyday machine. And I know there's worries out there about the back for him. Twins don't have that worry. I know some agents told me that his clubhouse persona is a problem. I didn't see it, and I was there enough, and I've been around enough to know when it's phony and when it's not. And when you see those guys every night, same 4 or 5 dudes talking baseball for 20 minutes after the game. It was Gio Urshela, it was Louis Arise, it was Gary Sanchez, it was Correa.
Yeah, they would sit, they'd have their post-game little meal and just
talk about the game.
Right.
And it was every night. That dude brought people together. I think he's a really good influence. And if I was going to spend my money, like, it's a huge chunk. There's no question. You also have a lot of really good young players who should be on this team for a while.
Right.
Who are
That'd be
still
a good person to emulate. Right?
Absolutely. And they're cheap. They're still all
That's
cheap.
my thing is, and I agree with everything you're saying. I think you mostly agree
I
with
would
it
say
too.
Correa in a second.
But
right.
that's the thing is, and we've talked about this, is like if you're avoiding, like on the pitching side, you're avoiding these 6-year, $150 million deals, and you're dumping Donaldson's contract because you view it as bad, and you're avoiding sort of these contracts that are a little iffy. You know they're going to age poorly.
Yeah.
And that's great. I think it's logical to avoid those. But the only reason to avoid those is to not have them on the books so that then you can use that money in a more intelligent way. Now, you can forever just say, we don't think it's an intelligent way to sign guys to 4, 5, 8, 9-year contracts.
Right.
Which that is logical also.
Totally.
Like I agree with that. But I don't think the Twins have shown that they can sort of keep the books totally clean of those and then every year load up on these 1-year deals or 1+1 or 2-year deals.
Yeah.
Because for the most part, they haven't had success with those type of deals. Like you think about even going back to like Lance Lynn, but then, just the Haps and the Shoemakers and the Bundys, you end up
Certainly
spending,
not from the pitching side. They haven't shown that they
right.
can.
And that was when people were like, $35 million. Correa was absolutely, in my mind, and statistically worth over $35 million.
Yep.
But people were like, but if they would have had that $35 million, you could have played Royce Lewis as shortstop or whatever, and spent that $35 million elsewhere. And my thing is like, what evidence is there at all that if you're limiting yourself to 1- and 2-year deals, short-term commitments, that the Minnesota Twins are going to more intelligently spend that $35 million than just buying one of the best players in the world and trotting him out there at shortstop? There's no evidence of that. And I think you can extend that to 7 years or 8 years or 9 years. Yes. You give out an 8-year, $250 million deal to Correa. Yeah. You're not doing it for year 6, 7, 8. You're doing it for the first.
Well, so I think it is. I honestly think the reason why we haven't heard anything is I'm going to guess that the price tag is somewhere around $9 and $315. That's my guess.
Right. I was going to say $9,305,
which is basically what Seager. Seager got $10,320 or something like that.
Yeah,
right.
and I think he wants to be close to the $35,100 that he got this year. If the problem is the back end years, why not pump up the AAV on the front end? I know it's hard to say that, but why not pay him $40 million? Yeah, it's tough. I get it why it's tough. I just think that the first 5 years, this was a transitional year for him. First year in a brand new organization, and he's trying to rework some things, and he told me towards the end, hey, if I come back, there's going to be some things that change. He has ideas about how he wants to help this team improve. And if he gets that money, it's not going to be somebody you have to worry about living up.
No,
and you're getting the 28 to 33, 34 seasons. And then, those last 2 or 3
maybe he
might
moves
suck.
to third or something like that, but that's fine too.
But the dude wants to be there and would definitely be someone that you could just have a great culture around for those 9 years.
It's funny. There was I forget who tweeted it. I think it might have been Craig Goldstein from Baseball Prospectus. He tweeted like how he phrased this in a funny way, but the gist of it was like 5 years ago was everyone loved when Billy Beane was running the A's. He'd make 400 roster moves every offseason to shed $11 million in payroll, bring in 10 new players, and get 2 wins better. And everyone would go, oh, my God, this guy is a genius. And then the Nationals would just sign Max Scherzer for $200 million. People would go, what dummies they are to do that. They're going to regret that. At the end, it's like, they just added like 8 wins to every season. And there is a component of that. Like, the less faith you have in the Twins signing the Archer types and the Bundy types, or even beyond that. And I think there's very good reason to have a lack of faith.
There
in that.
certainly isn't a track record of high
The less
performance
faith you
there.
have in their shorter term bargain basement or even decent sized 1 or 2 year deals paying off, the more you should want them to just go, we don't have to get cute about this shit.
Yeah.
Why don't we just give the
Get the
most
best
money
player.
to the best player and
you
then
already
figure
have
out
him
the
here,
rest? Right.
And he's been here, he's seen it, and he is okay with he wants to come back. You got to pay him. You do have to pay him, but he wants to be here. You don't have to attract him from out of nowhere. And look, okay, so you get 3 guys in that $35 million spent elsewhere. Marwin Gonzalez was 2 and 21.
Right. This is the time. Right. I mean,
So do you have 3 Marwin Gonzalez type players, and they're going to give you more than Correa did? No. And Correa probably is worth at least a win more. Like I just see this as it was a slow start. There was funky stuff going on. And he still ended up being – he was your best player in September, and some fans are like, well, the games didn't count then. Bullshit.
that wasn't his fault.
That was like at Yankee Stadium. Look who had big hits.
Right. If
Look,
the team
against
doesn't completely
Cleveland.
collapse,
Yeah.
the narrative would be, oh, Carlos Correa did exactly what he was supposed to. In August and September, he carried them into the playoffs.
Absolutely.
But they were such a piece of shit that he couldn't even carry them into the playoffs. Like, it was.
He had that homer off Karinchak. They were down 7-0, and they lost 7-6. He hits a 3-run bomb off Karinchak that scared the shit out of Cleveland. And if they had enough gas, they win that game, and they come up just shy. Next night, same exact thing, and he had a big hit there. Like, he had big hits in that 5-game series that they lost.
Yeah, I think we were talking at the beginning of September how his WA was basically negative at that point, and
he ended up second on the team.
Second on the team. So yeah, he had a great September.
And this is going to sound silly, I realize, but if he signs a 9-year deal, and let's say it averages $34 million a year or something like that, whatever it is, 9 years from now, we're talking what, 2031 or something? Yeah. I'm not saying $30 million is like not going to be a lot of money then,
right?
But $30 million 9 years from now, think
his payroll will be $250 million in 9 years.
There's a preposterous statement.
Wow.
Nominee for that.
Hey, wait.
But yes, I
it'd be 220
something. But think of 10 years ago.
Right.
Huge salaries were $15, $18 million for star players.
Yep.
Like in arbitration and on 5-year deals. 5 years, $100 million for a pitcher was like, oh my God.
Right.
And I'm not saying, if Correa ages poorly or gets hurt, has to move to first base, whatever it is, year 7, 8, 9, you're paying him $35 million.
Yeah.
It's going to hurt a little bit. But at that point, the great players at that point, the great, 27-year-old players are going to be making $50 million.
Yes.
And it's the same thing with Buxton. Like, people are like acting like Buxton's contract, well, he can't miss this time because they're paying him like a superstar. Wrong.
No, they're not.
They're paying him like a third starter.
Yes.
He's getting $15 million. I don't think that was one
His
of the
contract allows you to be able to afford Carlos Correa. Because, yes, okay, if Byron stays healthy the whole year and is an 8-win player, you're going to pay out an additional $10 million. Right. But you're going to be happy to pay that $10 million because you get the MVP
to pay for
at that point.
Yeah, so I think
you definitely have the flexibility, and you have the guy here. And I just...
But okay, flip that then.
Okay.
Do you think they will do that?
Yeah, I've got 3 follow-up questions.
All right, so Xander Bogaerts, I see them. I think if you don't get Correa, you push for him, and I think that they'll try to dip into that market.
Okay, that was Dan Hayes, John Bonnes, a young whippersnapper named Aaron Gleeman, talking about Carlos Correa and the shortstop market and all that stuff. There's a lot more where that came from.
Right.
That was 10 minutes of about a 2-hour conversation, not just about Correa, but about free agency, about the rumors and speculation Dan knows, which no one is more plugged into that stuff for the Twins. So if you want to hear the whole thing, go to patreon.com/Gleeman. It's patreon.com/Gleeman. You can listen to that one actually for free. And then if you stick around, we would love to have you stick around. Any new ones we put out are just $1 an episode. And during the off season, we put out like at most 1 a week.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
So it costs you $1 here and there.
That's right.
Before we get to the other 4 or 5 off-season needs,
we should mention that those Patreons are ad-free, unlike this one,
yes,
where we talk about our
ad-free.
sponsors. We've got 2 sponsors. So let's start with Trade Coffee. Trade Coffee is, clearly it's become a go-to for us. It's one of the advantages of being home now. Like when we travel to Philadelphia, it'll be fine. We'll have some Wawa coffee or whatever.
But it's not trade
But
coffee.
it ain't trade coffee. And as a result, I love being able to wake Chrissy up in the morning with a thermos of coffee on her nightstand, basically a thermal
An industrial-sized bucket of...
That is exactly what we do. And it's one of her favorites. And you can try some of our favorites because they have basically taken that which we like. We kind of like sort of more exploratory coffees.
They have a bonus curated list. He's an influencer now.
That's exactly
They
right.
have a drink like bonus.
The truth is it's really more of a Chrissy influence list.
True. But the whole idea of
right.
Trade Coffee is like they're getting you small, independent, locally sourced and roasted from across the country.
Right.
And you can try not only different types of coffee. If you're into just basic stuff, they got that. If you're into kind of weird stuff, they got that.
Yep.
And everything in between. But also, you want to try something from Austin. You want to try something from Seattle. You want to try something from Boston or even Philly.
And I know you're going to love that first bag because if you don't, they replace it free.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And
right.
they use what you do and don't like as you go through to then gain intelligence and recommend things that will fit what you like going forward. If you want to give Trade Coffee a try, you can go to drinktrade.com/Gleeman. That's drinktrade.com/Gleeman, and you'll get $30 off your subscription to the best coffees in the country. Support small businesses, brew the best cup of coffee you've ever made, all at home. It's time to try Drink Trade right now. Our listeners can get $30 off their first order plus totally free shipping. That's drinktrade.com/Gleeman. And our last sponsor for today is BetterHelp, which we've talked a lot about in the past. Here's the idea behind BetterHelp. If you have some issue in your life that is giving you difficulty, or maybe you just think it's something you can improve upon,
right?
But you've kind of been like, I don't know, I could get help on this, but it's kind of the pain in the butt to go and try to find a doctor, and I don't actually want to make a phone call or see somebody in person because I'm kind of feeling self-conscious about that. BetterHelp can step in there.
Right.
They can get you, fully licensed therapy. If you want to do a video call with somebody, you can do that. If you don't want to be on camera, you can do a phone call. If you're like me and you hate phone calls, you can do a live chat session with them where you're just typing back and forth.
Right. You don't have to go to your friends and say, hey, you know what? Turns out I have been depressed. I'm battling depression. You got any somebody you talk to?
You don't have to set it up all on your own. Within 2 or 3 days, they can line you up with a fully trained professional who's equipped to handle whatever your thing is or things are.
Right.
And you can kind of get unstuck with BetterHelp. You can learn more about it, and you can save 10% off your first month by going to betterhelp.com/Gleeman. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Gleeman. Go sign up. Make your life better. Better yourself.
Right.
Actually address your off-season needs. Much like the Minnesota Twins will be attempting.
Or just become a little less miserable about whatever it is you're battling right now.
Do you think we should send this link to the Twins?
No, the Twins.
Can they help them get a shortstop? BetterHelp.com/Gleeman. Go find your fill-in shortstop. Okay, so the other needs, we're agreed on shortstop.
Right. Both of us are a number one.
Yeah. Can't roll out the product.
Right, that's it.
Without a shortstop.
All right. Next.
Although that'd be innovative.
Yep.
No shortstops. Just they changed the game.
We're just going to go, right? Yep.
We're going to go 3 left fielders.
That's right.
2 catchers, a pitcher. No. Couldn't be any worse. Why not try it? Okay, so for me, the number 2 need, and it's really probably like a 1B situation, but I know some people disagree. We've talked a lot about the potential.
So you would still put this in the category of you cannot go live without this?
No, you can go live without it.
So this is at least a medium priority.
For you. You were in the business world. Me, I sit in my sweatpants and write about baseball. So there's none of that.
Okay.
But I'll tell you, I've been doing this for 20 years. This has been either the 1 or 2 need every offseason for 20 years, which is frontline starting pitching. And the Twins are not unique with that. I mean, there are teams that have exceptional starting pitching. And if you ask their fans on day 1 of the offseason, what do they need? They'll say
exactly right.
frontline start, more starting pitching.
Right.
But the tricky part, and we've talked a lot about this, but the tricky part of where the Twins are at right now is theoretically, if everyone is healthy, they have 5 starting pitchers to fill out a solid opening day rotation. They have Sonny Gray, Tyler Mahle, Kenta Maeda, Joe Ryan, and Bailey Ober.
Right.
Those are all, I would say, 3rd or 4th starter or better. and if you have 5 of those, you're above average just to begin with.
Right.
They're lacking, I would say, an ace or number 1, but a couple of those guys, including Sonny Gray, can be or have been number 2 starter quality or certainly number 3 starter quality. So it makes it tricky because if all those guys are healthy, you got 5 in the rotation that you feel good about. Plus, you have Josh Winder waiting in the wings. You have Simeon Woods-Richardson. We saw Louis Varland down the stretch. And then, let alone, you go a little deeper into the farm system, someone like Jordan Balazovic. If they bounce back, you start to get in some of the double-A prospects and all that. Like, you can go 8 or 9 or 10 deep on pitchers you would feel comfortable having be your 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th starter to begin the season. On the other hand,
I will just go talk about beginning the season. I'll also say this. This is a better rotation right now than they had last year, that they went into the season with.
I mean, I would argue that those 5 that I named, Gray, Maeda, Maui, Ryan, Ober, if healthy, is a better rotation than they've had for a while, 10 years, probably.
That's right.
Which isn't necessarily.
I mean, I think I'm trying to remember what was it 2020. I think we were kind of taking a look at the rotation and thinking, well, we feel pretty good about this. That was Odorizzi and Maeda and
but it's all on paper, and
Gibson
that gets to the problem and why I'm still stumping for a frontline starter, which is, well, Maeda hasn't pitched in 2 years by the time opening day arrives. Basically, you don't know what you're going to get from him. You hope. Maui, you don't know what the hell you're going to get from Tyler Maui. You hope. For that matter, Ober. Ober hasn't thrown 100 innings in a season yet. Can you count on him? Joe Ryan, you can count on, I think, to the extent that you can count on any second-year pitcher. And Sonny Gray, while he's been banged up, you can count on, I think. But that's 2 guys plus 2 guys you're hoping are healthy and a 3rd guy in Ober that you're not worried about, coming back from a major arm injury. You're just worried about, like, can he sustain a workload and avoid bruises and nicks and strains and stuff like that. And even with Winder, who's their 6th starter, has had shoulder problems now for 2 years and couldn't stay in the rotation last year because of
the slider first guy that he sees to be.
So
doesn't
my thing with
well
that,
with
and it's I'm not saying it's not a tricky situation. It is a tricky situation because if even most of those guys are healthy, you don't need a starter. And in fact, you can argue they don't really have room for a starter because if those 5 guys are healthy that I named and they were to sign one of the names we're going to talk about here in free agency, who gets dumped from the rotation? Who goes to AAA or who goes to the bullpen? It's probably, I guess, Bailey Ober or something like that. But I'm just so skeptical, individually and collectively, about Maeda, Maui, Ober, Winder. And then, toss in Varland and Simeon Richardson, nothing to do with them specifically, but just they're rookies. They're untested guys who,
I see the point on this, but I would disagree on the priority level on this. To me, this is one of the 6.
Right.
But it is in the low priority one. It is not one of the, I don't feel like we and part of that is because I take a look at what they've got already and go, that's already better than they were on opening day this year.
But I just think what they've got is a very fluid, like.
I mean,
you're trying to grab hold of it, and it's flipping through your fingers.
I would rather start with what they've got and have questions about everybody staying healthy than have Chris Archer and Dylan Bundy.
No, I agree with that. I agree with that.
Right, and then on top of that, I like what they've got below it better than what they had below that as well. I like the backup options more.
I would just be worried that.
No.
You start out opening day and your Maui's not ready, and Maeda's on a pitch count, or he's not ready, and Bailey Ober strains something, or whatever, and then all of a sudden Louis Varland's your 4th starter, and then, which is fine, but then who do you turn to in June when you need another starter and another starter? And I agree, like you're viewing it more as, can we literally have a team without addressing this?
Yeah, and I would say even a winning team.
Right, I mean like a functional team. And I don't disagree with that. They can skip the rotation entirely this offseason and have a functional starting rotation. Even if my skepticism is warranted on a couple of those guys, they can still have a functional rotation. Now, it will probably include Varland starting the season in the majors, maybe even Simeon Woods-Richardson. But it's functional. I mean, it's not bad. It's not, all that. I guess I'm viewing it more as not just like, can we literally have a functional team? I'm viewing it more as, what's the end goal here? Like, what's the...
I don't know. What's the product launch? Is the goal for people to sign up for the product and experience it and go, yeah, the rotation's functional.
Right.
Or is the goal to actually try to put forth a championship caliber rotation? And whatever you want to think about, I mean, even if you give them all a clean bill of health, which is remarkably optimistic, it's a really good rotation. Maui, Gray, Maeda are all top-end guys, and I think Joe Ryan has the potential to be there, and Ober, for that matter, has the potential. But is that a great rotation, even if you were to guarantee health? I think that's still a rotation that, come July, you're going, man, they could use somebody to start game one of a playoff series there.
Maybe.
But the problem with that, and so that's why I listed it at number 2, it's not the second biggest priority in terms of, can we literally have a functional, competitive team? Yes, they can without that. And I think your view of it is probably closer to their view of it. Just talking to Falvey on the record and talking to some people off the record since then of we'll look at starting pitching, but we feel pretty good about what we have. So I think probably in the minority or in the opposite camp to that, but I just see it as you can count on all the health you want. I think that's a mistake, but you can count on that. But ultimately, if your best starting pitcher is Sonny Gray or maybe Tyler Mahle, or you're hoping you get the 2020 version of Maeda instead of the rest of his career, that's not one of the top 3 or 4 rotations in the American League. It's still below, several teams that are championship caliber teams. So that's why I view it.
What I would say about that is I have that in that third category. I actually have it as the second. If I was going to categorize those top 4, the 4 things in that category, I would have it as the second biggest one in that category. We'll talk a little bit about what I have higher than that.
It's the most impact. Do you know what I mean?
Maybe.
The potential to have the most impact, but it's not the most pressing need.
Right.
I guess is how I would.
I would still make it, something that you are absolutely looking for. I think you've got plenty of room to do that. I think they can explore that. But I would also say I don't. I'm not doing anything unless it's my number one guy.
Well, so this is what I'm getting to. So I had a thing yesterday about going over these needs and saying, let's cut the BS here. Here's who I would actually try to sign if these were the needs. And I talked about that with this starting pitcher, which is, I agree with that. There is absolutely zero need, and I think they at least agree with this. There's absolutely zero need for them to try to sign the typical Twins 1 year J-Happ or Shoemaker or Archer or Bundy or go back to Ramon Ortiz and Sidney Ponson and fill in the blank. There is zero need for that, regardless of injury, because I would rather just roll with Louis Varlin or Simeon Woods Richardson or Josh Winder or hell, guys beyond that even. I would rather roll with that than invest $7 million in some 38-year-old you're hoping gives you a 4.5 ERA. I'm totally in agreement on that.
I agree with you on that. Nick Nelson had a story on Twins Daily this week, basically talking about the Sonny Gray threshold. It basically comes down to if I can identify a pitcher as clearly better than Sonny Gray, then I'm interested. And if I can't identify a pitcher as clearly better than Sonny Gray, I am much less interested.
I would say
it drops off a cliff.
I agree with that. I would say at Sonny Gray's level or higher for me.
Okay. See, I'm not even sure at his level is necessarily what I want.
See, but I mean, this goes back to I guess how we're viewing Mahle and Maeda a little differently, maybe. Because Mahle and Maeda are potentially at his level or better if healthy. Yeah. I just have a great deal of skepticism that that's the case, and if I'm right about that, then it's Joe Ryan and Bailey Ober who have the chance to be Sonny Gray.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Ryan was pretty close to Sonny Gray last year in terms of overall impact.
Yeah, because he threw 40 more innings. Yeah, but overall impact doesn't help you in a playoff series.
Yeah, well, I see what you're saying.
You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm looking for guys, I call them playoff caliber starters.
Right. Yep.
And the Twins have just so rarely, think of the playoff games the Twins have played, 20 of them, 25 of them or whatever in the last 20 years. How often, first of all, they've been favored in none of those games because a big part of that is whether it's game one of a series, game three of a series.
They don't have the pitching matchup.
Their pitcher is just much worse on paper than the opposing pitcher. And even if all those guys are healthy, that would be the case here. Let's say Sonny Gray is your number one starter. They're playing whoever in a playoff series. What are the odds that whoever they're playing doesn't have a pitcher as good or better than Sonny Gray for game one? Then you go game two. same thing. Maui, Maeda, Joe Ryan, Ober. And so I want to get to a spot, if you can, it's hard, where they're equal or better than some of these teams, because I feel
but I don't have getting another Sonny Gray-ish sort of player does that. That's my point on you've got to shoot higher than that.
But that's very funny to say, because how can you I get what you're saying, but how can you be confident about the overall state of the rotation if Sonny Gray is atop that rotation, but you also are saying it's not worth upgrading unless you can get someone better than our number one starter, because you're saying our number one starter is not that amazing to begin with.
Everybody wants more pitching, but everybody wants more good pitching all the time, right? I'm doing this comparison. We're talking about this. I'm comparing it to other needs that I see on the roster, right? So I'm not saying that this isn't something I would really like the team to have. It's
sure,
similar,
I know you're not.
It's a similar to
it's preaching to the choir to say they need more pitching.
Right. No,
I get that.
It's similar to troubleshooting bugs in a system. Like there's some functionality we could really add it. It would be awesome. It would really help out the system a lot. We can go live without it, but well, yeah. I mean, I get it, but there's this other thing that I think we actually need more. And
I guess in those terms, I'd rather not launch it if it's only going to be functional. Do you know what I mean?
That puts it.
I'm not trying to launch
sort of category 2, which is
right. I'm not trying to launch a product that people go, it's all right. You know what I mean? If I'm a restaurant owner and we're doing our soft launch and we think people are going to come in and go, food's okay. Right. I don't think it's worth launching at that point. I don't think it's, but I'm not saying this is by all means.
Last year, the week before opening day, we were taking a look at the starting rotation going, they need more.
Yeah, we were right though, by the way.
Exactly right. Yeah, we were like,
opening day
more.
of the last 19 seasons.
We were leaving. Why they got to go out and get Montas? They got to go get somebody. We said that at the time. We said they didn't get enough done.
Of course,
and they got Paddock. That didn't really move the needle. We didn't think it moved the needle. It didn't move the needle. Turns out,
right.
So I'm not saying that just clearing last year's rotation is good enough, right? Because we didn't think it was good enough last year, right? But I think you raise a point that this is, if they started opening day with this rotation, I wouldn't be like, well, this was a failure of an offseason.
I agree.
You know what I mean?
But it's also the fifth best rotation in the American League.
Especially if they used that $25 million or something and went out and signed something else.
Well, yes.
You know what I mean?
I'm also skeptical about that too. But so you go, well, okay. And I agree with what you're saying. It's not worth targeting just to pick up some depth, but I sort of always feel that way. Right. I would always roll with young guys and minor league signings rather than a $5 million 1 year. I just feel like there's no worse return on a type of acquisition than a 1 year, $5 million deal for an old starting pitcher.
I mean, we beat up on Archer and we beat up on Bundy, but what they do is they did establish a floor.
Right.
Now that floor was pretty low.
Yeah, I'm sick of floors. I'm sick of functionality.
And it turns out they needed that floor because they wanted to get Archer out of the rotation. They couldn't do it, right?
But that's just because they decided to sign Archer and Bundy instead of someone better.
Well, that's true. Yeah, no, I agree with you on that.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. At some point, you go, hey, it's a good thing we signed Archer and Bundy because the rest of our rotation was pretty garbage. You go, well, yeah, you should have signed someone better than that. So, but in terms of options, and I totally agree with what you're saying of there's a threshold where it's not even worth guys better than Bundy and Archer, but it's not worth like signing.
We just have a slightly different option on what that threshold is, right?
To me, the free agent class is led by at least 2 future Hall of Famers. I think DeGrom probably has a shot at being a future Hall of Famer. His counting stats are not going to be great, but he's going to be like a 2-3 time Cy Young winner.
Right.
But it's led by DeGrom, Verlander, and Kershaw.
Right.
The Twins are not signing any of those guys, I don't think. Although we debated that with Dan. You talked a lot about Verlander on the Patreon. I personally don't think that's going to ever happen. I'd be surprised if they even made a call on any of those guys. The fourth guy in that group, and I think just based on the last 2 years' performance, is right up there with them.
And they were rumored to chase him last year.
Right, is Carlos Rodon.
Or at least his agents.
And you can't mention Carlos Rodon over the last 2 years without someone going, yeah, but the injuries.
Yeah, his shoulder.
Here's my point with that, which is right. He broke out last year with the White Sox, 2021, and was up there for the Cy Young after
he was a top 5 pick coming out of North Carolina State, just filthy stuff, college lefty, threw 95, great slider. He was expected to be this type of pitcher. But for the first 4 or 5 years in the majors, he was more often than not mediocre, in part because he just had a ton of shoulder problems and arm injuries. And even last year, as he was having kind of a Cy Young caliber, he got to like 25 starts, and then in September, he had shoulder problems. No surgery or anything like that, but he missed starts. So then he's a free agent last offseason, and we had the same conversation about him last offseason. And I liked him as a target last offseason, but he clearly wasn't getting 5-year, $100 million plus offers. And so he took a 2-year offer, 1 year plus an option, similar to the Correa situation.
Player option.
Right, a player option, just
right.
kind of
Similar
like
to
Correa,
yep.
with the Giants. And he got like $20 million,
yep.
and it triggered automatically if he made a certain number of starts, which he did. He made 31 starts this year, which is a full workload. He threw 180-something innings, which in 2022 is a full workload, and was spectacular.
Right.
Cy Young caliber.
Right.
He may not win it in the National League, but Cy Young caliber. And so it's a funny thing once you get that injury-prone label, and he deserves it.
Right.
But really, over the last 2 years, he's been healthier than DeGrom. He's been healthier than Kershaw. He's been healthier than Tyler Mahle and Kenta Maeda.
And Verlander.
And for that matter, Sonny Gray.
Right. Yeah, well, that's
true. Yeah, Verlander had Tommy John surgery
exactly
2 years
right.
ago. And so it's almost like, are we really talking about Carlos Rodon being injury prone as a reason to stay away or be skeptical? Or are we just saying pitchers are injury prone? Because how many seemingly not injured pitchers have the Twins acquired only to learn that they are injured or soon were injured? And so I'm not saying you should dismiss Carlos Rodon's injury concerns, but that's baked into his market already because teams know about his injury. The Twins know about his injury. So my thing with him is if he weren't injured, this is similar to the Buxton conversation we had 6 months ago. If Carlos Rodon were not injured, the Twins would have no chance to sign him because he would have signed for $225 million last offseason, or 2 off seasons ago.
Or this offseason, he'd be signing for a 6-year deal, right?
The only reason, like I just guessed and said 5 years, $110 million for Carlos Rodon. I gave him the same contract that Gaussman and Robbie Ray got last offseason. The only reason he would be available at that price is because people are scared of his shoulder, which is justified.
Right.
But my point is, you can avoid that investment in Carlos Rodon because you're scared of his shoulder. But any pitcher you try to pick up, Tyler Mahle, Sonny Gray, on and on, I don't know that they're that less of an injury risk than Rodon. But what I do know is that the majority of guys you can get can't come anywhere close to the upside or the ability to make a staff-carrying impact. So I would list him, like today I had an article, top 15 free agents they should pursue that I thought. Right. Number 1 was Correa. Number 2 was Rodon. And I don't think they will do that. But I'm saying there's no more impact you can make, other than Correa maybe, than signing a true ace pitcher for the past 2 years. And it's not a guy who just came out of nowhere. It's a guy who early in his career was expected to be this type of pitcher, and from a stuff standpoint. And if you can get him for the type of contract that guys like Kevin Gaussman and Robbie Ray get, I think you do it. And if he's hurt, he's hurt. But I think the risk that people assume with him is not that much above and beyond or different than the risk that comes along with any 30-year-old starting pitcher. And the Twins have seen that, firsthand. They thought they were getting Tyler Mahle because he was a quote-unquote horse.
Right.
Meanwhile, he was hurt when they got him, and then he got even more hurt after they got him.
Right.
Well, is he more or less risky than Carlos Rodon?
He's also 29 years old. So you've got the age on your side on that. I will say this.
Assuming it's not an 8-year deal. Yeah, 4 or 5 year deal for a 29-year-old.
I'm less optimistic about his health. I see your point on the last 2 years, but I'll also say, 2 years ago, he got shut down in August and doesn't make it to September
Just
or to
a ton of health
it doesn't
problems.
do any good if to get that number 1 guy for the playoffs if he can't pitch by the time the playoffs come around.
Absolutely.
And even this year, the question was sort of, is he going to hold up all the way till the end of the year? Because there was even some questions around the trade deadline about whether or not his shoulder was getting tired again. To the point where, I'd almost consider, is he somebody that you start pitching in May? Do you know what I mean? Because you want him.
But I would just say, how else are you getting someone that good?
Right.
In what other circumstance can you get someone like good?
Yeah.
The injury is your path to getting him. Right. The injury concern is the path to getting him if you're the
On
Twins.
the free agency market, that's certainly not the case. I mean, there is no other way to get. I mean, there's no other guy. the other three ones are going to be much harder to get than Rodon. Like
Sure.
he's the one that is clearly available to all 30 teams,
Right.
and doesn't give a preference to past employers or to
right. He hasn't pitched 15 years for the Dodgers.
Kershaw's probably going. You would think would prefer the Dodgers. Right. You would think Verlander would prefer to return to the Houston.
And also just in general, those guys are near the end of Hall of Fame careers. I don't know that they're going to want to go sign with a 78 win Twins
That's
team.
right. No, I get it. So I mean, he's why I think you kind of build in that filter, when you're kind of trying to take a look at that. And I don't mean you, I mean just all of us.
Yes,
just build that.
I agree.
Build that filter in there. I think the other way is.
By the way, I would also just rank him number one overall without that filter. But I think your point is even more well taken than
that. I don't think I would, but I think the other option is going to have to be, you go out and trade. You try to pry away a Woodruff from the Brewers. You try to something. I know.
I don't think they got the goods to make that happen.
Yeah,
unless you feel like trading Brooks Lee.
Well, I'm not totally opposed to trading Brooks Lee.
I mean, we saw what it cost to get Tyler Mahle with a year and a half of team control.
Right. Yep.
It cost them 2 of their top 8 prospects plus a couple other guys or one other guy. And he was damaged goods, and he was not an ace starter. Obviously, he's a potential number 2 guy.
And what to get Sonny Gray, which was similar to a Brooks Lee.
Pick.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
And Sonny Gray's not at the level of Rodon. So, but in terms of non-Rodon, then it becomes trickier for the reasons we talked about, like Nick was writing about these sort of, are they as good or better than Sonny Gray? The 2 guys that, to me, are at that level are, one, Nathan Eovaldi, who has injury concerns of his own, but when healthy has been a Sonny Gray-esque pitcher, and Chris Bassett, who we talked about as a trade target last offseason. Yeah. Oakland traded him to the Mets, and they had a really good year for the Mets. Yep. They're, I think, both 32 or 33. If they want 5-year deals, I'm out. But if they want, 2 years, $30 million, or 3 years, $39 million, something like that, which we've seen as a sort of common template for starting pitchers, I think that would make sense at that point, because then you're adding a second guy at the sort of Mahle, Gray, Maeda level.
Yeah. I mean, this is why I kind of brought up I'm not sure that I'm interested in anybody less than or equal to Sonny Gray. Those last 2 names just don't do a lot for me. Now, I get that this kind of comes down to, at this point, with those 2 players and given the needs on the team, I start figuring in secondary concerns like, well, can I get him in a good contract? Which is, I think, is what you kind of basically said.
Absolutely.
You basically said, I like both of those guys provided they're not a bad contract. Do you know what I mean? Yep. Whereas Rodon, I'm more interested in taking it even if it's a bad contract.
Although I don't think 5-110's bad.
No, I don't think a bad contract.
I agree. But the thing I would say about that, and I get logically what you're saying, and I think a lot of people agree with you. I think the Twins probably agree with you. But if I would say,
dives way
if you don't like Chris Bassett, let's say,
I don't.
I'm not saying you
dislike
don't
him,
like him, but I'm saying if you view him as not worthwhile to sort of add on to what they already have, I would question if you're overrating what they already have, because Chris Bassett is essentially Sonny Gray.
No, I agree with you.
So you're going,
I agree that he is Sonny Gray.
Right. So if you're saying whether it's Bassett, Eovaldi, whoever, I mean, there's a few other guys we can mention too. But if you're saying, well, yeah, I mean, this guy's pretty good, but is he a huge upgrade? But he's equal to your best starter right now. Right. I would say, well, that means your rotation is probably not as strong as you think it is.
I'll say,
but a lot of this just comes down to the injury stuff,
right? And I think I think it coming down to the comparison thing. Here's what I would say about this. When I keep saying, this isn't my biggest priority. To me, the bigger priority, and I don't think it's any one of your 5. It's the 6th one, right? On my list, it is. I would put also in the category of a low priority, but maybe even higher than that of a pitcher is we got to get more offense from someplace to the other, especially since we're losing Correa. Now, maybe that happens by picking up one of the top 4 shortstops.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? But you're
saying replacing Correa's offense with Correa's offense would be pretty much a wash?
That would be fine. Yeah.
Smart.
I'd be fine with that.
Yeah.
But if you can't get one of those top 4 shortstops, and I think we both agree that is likely.
No, collectively, the odds of signing one of 4 are much lower than 50%.
Right.
Collectively.
Exactly. Right. if you can't do that, to me, replacing that offense is a bigger priority than adding a Sonny Gray level pitcher.
I agree. You're kind of viewing it as a if this then that.
Right.
Whereas
I'm just trying to prioritize the six.
Right. So I have shortstop as the number one priority.
Right.
Which means I'm going to push to sign one of those shortstops. Right. You're saying if you don't sign one of those shortstops, then you should then kind of reorder your list. You should reseed the tournament at that point.
Right.
And I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, I'm saying that you've got two needs. You need a shortstop and you need offense. Right. Now, if you can handle both of those in the same way, great, right? But if you can't,
right, yours is more of a choose your own adventure. You know what I mean?
Well, and I think that's the way the Twins tend to approach things.
Turn to page 58. If you did not sign a shortstop, burn the book. You're screwed. Turn to page 70.
Yeah, if you signed one of the top four shortstops, turn to page 42.
I think that makes sense. Okay. All right. So along those lines, my third priority is catcher.
Yeah, that's my second priority. That's to me that falls in the middle category, which is like I can go live without it, but boy, do I not want to go live without it.
So they're losing to free agency Gary Sanchez and Sandy Leon. Now you can argue about how big of a loss that actually is, obviously.
Right.
They have Ryan Jeffers as the only catcher who will be on the 40-man roster once the offseason begins, the lone catcher, because they lost Caleb Hamilton to waivers. They have some actually decent catching prospects. Nobody who projects as, a star or anything, but they're, lower minors, AA type of guys. Falvey seemed to indicate that they now view Jeffers as someone who is not any other position you would call everyday guy, but catcher is not an everyday guy. But they don't view him as a 100 start a year primary catcher.
Right.
And what that probably means, in part because he's been hurt too much to count on that, and in part because he just hasn't hit right-handed pitching well enough. He knocks around lefties.
Yeah,
great.
Right.
And they like his pitch receiving and all that stuff. He's very smart. He works well with pitchers.
And I think they trust him to some extent versus right-handed hitting. I mean, they shouldn't because he's not a great hitter. But they trust him a third of the time.
But I think they would like, if Jeffers were healthier or better, you would say, well, they can just start him 100 times, and you need to find a true backup, which is a much easier thing to do. Instead, I think they view Jeffers as someone you want to play against all lefties and occasional righties, which means you then need someone to play against most righties, which righties represent 2/3 or 3/4 usually of the schedule.
Right.
And so if you start Jeffers against 50 lefties or 40 lefties and 40 righties, that leaves 80 games of someone else starting against righties, basically. And ideally, you would find a left-handed hitter to do that. The problem, though, Twins fans have gotten a little spoiled watching A.J. Brzezinski followed by Joe Mauer. Finding great left-handed hitting catchers, that's something that it's almost like an ace starter. People go nuts for that. Adley Rutschman is a switch hitter. He's going to probably win Rookie of the Year, or he was the number one pick 3 years ago, in part because that skill set is just so sought after. The idea of a guy who can play the number one defensive position or the most grueling defensive position can be an asset offensively and gives you the platoon advantage 2/3 of the time.
Often, if you get a player like that, since he's already got the platoon advantage 2/3 of the time, he's your starting catcher.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like he's not just a platoon catcher
to hit lefties.
That's right.
Which like the Twins
to hit lefties half the time,
which the Twins did with like Mike Redmond or something like that.
You might give that guy 110
starts. The problem,
starts.
though, is so I'm all for that. I think that would be great. The problem is you look at free agency and you go, the second best left-handed hitter is Tucker Barnhart, and the third best is Sandy Leon, who I would hesitate to call a hitter. Great guy, great catcher, that can't hit. I'm
not sure they're not opposed. I don't know that they're opposed to bringing him back. They'd probably like to have him back, but
I would like Sandy Leon back.
To shoot.
It's great to talk to.
They'd probably like to shoot a little higher.
The only guy free agent wise who fits that description of a left-handed hitting catcher that you would feel comfortable giving 80 starts to against right-handed pitching is Omar Narvaez, who's been Brewers, Seattle, bounced around a little bit, made the All-Star team actually in 2021, but then struggled this past year with the Brewers. You look at his career numbers, and he's like a 270 hitter against righties. He draws some walks, got some doubles power. Occasionally he's hit 15, 20 homers in the majors. He's been very inconsistent.
He started this year well with the Brewers. He was bad in the second half, similar to the other guy. Both of their catchers ended up having a really good first half of the year, and then they ended up a crummy second half of the year.
So, I think that would be a good fit, and just you wouldn't expect him to break the bank on a contract. I'm thinking 1 year, 8 to 10 mil, or 2 years, 14 mil, something like that. You pair him with Jeffers over the next couple of years, I think that could make a lot of sense as just a straightforward quasi-platoon, and it also leaves the opportunity for Jeffers to develop further into a guy. If he starts to handle the righty matchups that he does get, he starts to handle those better and he stays healthy. Maybe a year into that, you go, okay, now Jeffers is going to take on a bigger role. We're going to reduce the role of Narvaez, which works from a monetary
Jeffers
standpoint.
did show a fair amount of promise by the middle of the year. He had a really slow start to the year, showed a lot more in the middle of the year, both right. I mean, I don't know how he was hitting right-handers, in May and June, but I would probably like to try and see a double split, so to speak. How did he hit those guys when he was going good as opposed to when he was struggling early in the year? But
so that's the only guy who really fits that. Then you're into right-handed options who you're just confident can hold their own better than Jeffers against righties. You know what I mean?
Right.
Which I think Christian Vasquez is a good example of that. He's just just to me, the quintessential veteran, low end starting catcher. He bats eighth for you. He plays against lefties and righties. He throws people out. He handles the pitching staff. Now they could shoot much, much higher and go for Wilson Contreras, who's probably been one of the 2 or 3 best catchers of the last decade for the Cubs. Won a World Series. 3 All-Star teams, coming off his best season statistically, offensively, great arm, up and down as a pitch framer. But he's a guy who's been a World Series winning catcher. He's an All-Star, in a good year, an MVP caliber player. He's 30,
right,
on a 3 or 4 year deal. Let's do it,
sure,
and we'll deal with Jeffers. We'll figure out what to do with him.
Again, at some point, you're starting to look at the contract as opposed to just
But to your point,
right.
though, what you're saying is if they lose the shortstop bat.
Right.
And they replace it with an Elvis Andrus, where do you replace that offense? Well, the easiest way to replace that offense is to find another guy who is so much better than his position offensively.
Right.
Well, and the easiest place to do that is catcher, because the bar for catchers.
And then you end up having Jeffers as somewhat of a trade chip.
Yeah, I think that would probably have to be the case.
At some point, then now you've got Jeffers to trade to a team that's looking for a starting catcher and might have an extra
Something
pitcher.
like
he could be part of a package that you would send for.
I think Wilson Contreras
top
is very appealing. I just think it's again like shortstop. There's 5 teams that don't need a catcher.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Of
Exactly
his
right.
quality.
Right. Yes.
But yeah, if you could get
that
him,
market is going to be crazy.
If you could get him for 4 years and like $70 million or something like that, absolutely sign me up. But I'm not going 6 years, 100 and something for a catcher, especially. We've seen how catchers age. Okay. Beyond that, my next one is also offense.
Right.
Which is a right-handed hitting corner outfielder who is basically better than Kyle Garlick is my goal with that. And it's twofold. One is, if you look at their depth chart for left and right field, it's all left-handed hitters. You have, at the moment, Kepler, Kirilloff, Larnach, Gordon, and waiting in the wings, Matt Wallner. Those are all left-handed hitters.
Yep.
Your only right-handed hitter, aside from Buxton and Celestino in center, is Kyle Garlick. And God love Kyle Garlick. He's done a nice job in his role.
Right.
But he cannot hit righties at all.
Yep.
And even playing 2 times a week, he can't seem to stay healthy. And so he's just a pure platoon guy. And the bar for production against lefties for a pure platoon right-handed outfielder is higher than just, an 800 OPS. So I would be fine keeping Kyle Garlick if that's what it comes to and hoping he's healthier. But to me, you want a rich man's version of Kyle Garlick. And so there are some, it's not
so this is similar to what I agree with you, that I'm happy to take a look at. It does become an interesting exercise in sort of identifying players, because you've got to identify a right-handed outfielder that's good enough that they can smack around lefties on a regular basis, but isn't so good that they can actually expect a starting job. I liked your list. I like McCutcheon is, I think, an interesting one.
Older guys or guys who have had recent injuries, so that in terms of their market, they might not have guaranteed everyday jobs.
And you are advantaged in that none of these guys are going to break the bank. Like none of them picking up this isn't going to stop you from getting any of the bigger needs on the list.
The
for the
three
most
I
part.
listed in my sort of good, better, best were Mitch Haniger from the Mariners, Will Myers from the Padres, and Andrew McCutchen from the Brewers, but really from the Pirates. That's what everyone remembers. But there's other guys, Trey Mancini, Tommy Pham. I mean, it's not a super difficult skill set, just a competent right-handed left.
It's going to be a 1-year deal. It's exactly the kind of deal that the Twins love to sign people to. It's going to be a 1-year, $8 million deal.
Right, should be. And if
$6 million
Haniger gets a 3-year offer, you just move on to the next one.
That's right.
Because what I'm trying to accomplish with that is...
It's a CJ Cron / Jonathan Scope kind of deal.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Right. Like, they've got a lot of experience. We've seen that deal plenty of times with the Twins.
I'm trying to put in place a right-handed bat that can start those 2 or 3 games a week against lefties in place of Larnach or Kepler or Gordon or whoever. So they're not throwing lefties against lefties. That's a mistake. And can knock around those lefties reliably.
Right.
But if more injuries happen to the outfield, you can put them into a 5-day-a-week role, and they don't hit like Garlick against righties. Right. They're not a total black hole against righties. And you look at like a guy like Haniger, do you want to be playing him every single day against righties? You know, as your 6th hitter, something like that? Yeah, fine. So that's what I'm sort of trying to target, and I think you can add to the lineup and address some loss from shortstop via that.
Yep.
And you also just need better depth.
Right. Well, I mean, that's why I would say I saw that one, and I think you can go one of 2 ways on that. Well, either way, you can go the way that you suggested, right? I'm trying to find somebody that is, you know, a tweener kind of, you know, somebody not great enough to get a job as a starter, but somebody who's a good right-handed.
I want an elite platoon player who, if needed, can be an average everyday player.
Good clubhouse guy, good team leader, good veteran, etc. Like it's a very natural fit. We've seen these guys sign all the time with the Twins. This office that's maybe one of their strengths in terms of what they kind of do on this.
Mediocre guys.
The other option I would have on that's
our strength too.
It goes back to the big bat.
Yeah.
Right. Is that if you strike out on shortstops and you strike out on Contreras, right? And there's at least a third option that we haven't talked yet about with the big bat. This is a place where you can go and say, listen, we just got to go get a good rid.
Well,
we're going to get a starting right-handed outfielder, period, out there. We're going to get rid of Kepler, and we're going to swap him out with a right-handed hitting outfielder that we can plug in the middle of the lineup, and we don't have to worry about whether Kepler's
Aaron Judge, right? That's no, I agree, because if Elvis Andrus, I'm not trying to pick on him, but if he's your shortstop,
right,
and if Christian Vasquez is your new number 1 catcher,
right,
you almost by definition have to find a middle of the lineup bat somewhere. Right. And you're running out of spots to do that at some point. Right. And corner outfield is the most obvious.
I will say this just to close out the big bat 6th need that we've been talking about.
So this is
the other option
I didn't have and you have.
Yeah. And I've got it fairly high. I've got just above that a starting pitcher. I would say that the other option that you have there is trade Urshela, move Miranda to third. And now you got some place at first base / DH to do that. Right. Now that limits your flexibility in like how often Buxton gets a day off at DH. You know what I mean? Like, so there's a trade off there as well, but that is enough. But again, I view them needing a big, a top of the order bat, top / middle of the order bat as a bigger priority than a Sonny Gray level person. Now, maybe not as big as a better than Sonny Gray level person, right? But I feel like that you've either got to find that at shortstop, you got to find it at catcher, you got to find it in the outfielder, or you got to move around Urshela and find him at DH or first base.
We talked a lot about Urshela with Dan on the Patreon. Yeah. We outvoted you 2-1 that he will not be on the team next year.
Yeah, you did.
So I do think that is their plan, is to move Miranda primarily to third, which does open first, but I will caution against the idea that it really opens it, because you're going to be playing, hopefully, Kirilloff and Arise there. One can be DH, one can be first baseman. Now, you can argue, is Kirilloff someone to be counted on?
Right.
So, but yeah, to your point, if they want to go out and try to sign like a Jose Abreu to play first base or DH for them.
Exactly.
I mean, that's a Carlos Correa-esque bat to be third or fourth in your lineup or whatever. Yeah, absolutely. I just, and that's doable. I guess I would just be trying to find that offense at
one of the other spots. I agree with you.
A more premium defensive position.
I agree with you.
Because it limits their options. Once you have Jose Abreu, great player, or someone like that, great player.
but that blocks first base DH. And so then what happens if Kirilloff and Arise are healthy, but also Larnach and Wallner are healthy?
Right.
Well, someone's not playing because you have Jose Abreu playing every day, which is fine. It's not like the end of the world or anything.
Right. And I don't find that, purely, 38-year-old guy who's still hitting on free agency, so I can tie it up for 2 years as opposed to 3 or 4 or 5 years. I think Abreu is going to get a 3-year deal from somebody, right?
Yeah.
And that, that's not an ideal solution, but none of these are ideal solutions. You're going to give up something for everybody. You're either going to give up financial flexibility, or you're going to give up prospects, or you're going to, right? And you got to get that taken care of.
And I mentioned like corner outfield right-handed competency is a fairly abundant skill set to find.
Right.
Well, the more abundant is that same thing at first base or DH because there's no defensive requirement whatsoever. And so, there's Abreu and Josh Bell, and I don't know, you could list all that. I mean, there's probably 3 or 4 different guys that you could go after.
Right.
I think that's a fit too. I just think it closes off flexibility a little more than what I was doing, and it doesn't necessarily fix your outfield problem.
Right.
It fixes your lineup problem.
Right.
But what do you do then when a lefty's on the mound? You're still starting Kyle Garlick.
It's not an either or though either. Like there's plenty of room to also get a middling right-handed hitting outfielder, a secondary right-handed hitting outfielder, but also take care of that problem at first base.
Yeah, but I bet in that case you're trading somebody at that point.
You're
beyond Kepler, I would say. I don't know how you do that.
Well, you're getting rid of Urshela and you're getting rid of Kepler.
Well, yeah, but I'm not counting Urshela.
Okay.
I'm almost not counting Kepler as being on the team. But how do you play Arise, Kirilloff, Larnach, Wallner, Gordon?
Yeah, I mean, you've got stuff there that you
3 spots when you have Abreu and Mitch Haniger. Yeah. I mean, that's a nice problem to have.
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about how we need some prospects to be able to swap for pitching. So,
but the problem is a lot of those guys you're not going to get value. You're not getting value for
right now. You're
Kirilloff.
Selling low on too many of those guys.
Yeah, I guess that's not – I didn't have that on my list, but I think that's a good one. I actually almost put a line in about Abreu specifically when I was talking about the outfield spot and said basically, look, if you don't like any of these guys, you can kind of do a variation on the same theme. Yep. So I agree with all that. And I would, as a 6th thing, I only had 5 on my list, but if they said what was the 6th, I'd have that. Yeah. And I think it's viable. I just think it creates more overlap than the outfield version. Do you know what I mean?
Maybe.
It doesn't quite. Maybe
yours is more surgical than mine is, but mine is more flexible than yours is. Do you know what I mean? Yours is so more surgical. Like clearly, you get this thing that's a really good fit on this team as it's currently constructed. Right. I'm looking at it more in like, I got $50 million to spend. I've got really 2 things I've got to take care of by opening day. And now here are the 4 different ways I can pivot. I can pivot towards a starting pitcher. I can pivot towards a big bat. I can pivot towards, and I've got lots of different ways I can pivot towards that big bat. I can go to the shortstop or catcher or outfielder.
By the way, think they're more likely to take your stance than to take my stance on it, because not only because they like you better than me.
Sure.
And you're more charming than me. Better looking.
Yeah. Smarter. Keep going.
You didn't know your ACT. I went out to dinner with a bunch of writers the other night.
Yeah, I have no idea what my ACT
and we somehow got into an ACT discussion, which, by the way, you'll be shocked to learn that Do-Hyung Park, who got a perfect ACT score, is the one who initiated this conversation. But then we just started texting everyone who wasn't there and saying, what was your ACT? This was, by the way, like 10:30 at night on like a Tuesday. Yeah. I just started texting everyone, what's your ACT score? And some people just sent their score.
Right.
And some people were like, what are you talking about? And then some people like John the next morning was like, I don't know. I'm 100 years old. I don't remember my ACT.
In 1985, ACT wasn't as big a deal. It was SAT was the big deal. So that one I remember, but I don't remember the ACT.
I was at a table with 5 people, and I had the lowest ACT score at the table, which doesn't shock me. I don't consider myself that smart. But I then needed to find someone that we all knew who could reliably be counted on to have a lower ACT score than me, and I did find that person, thankfully. And we laughed about it for a while because they said, better looking,
like a almost a comedic. Disregard for it.
We want to tell their boss, do you realize you hired this person to write words? Because we're not sure.
Because he was out till 6 a.m. playing video games before the show.
Yeah.
He was.
But so, I think the Twins, well, he still does that. That really has not changed one bit. Now it's Call of Duty instead of whatever the hell, Mario Kart or whatever it was 20 years ago. But so I think the Twins are more likely to take your approach, which is
Yeah, I do too.
If you're looking at how they're slicing up $60 million, I think it's more likely to go to hitting than pitching.
No, that's true.
And that's fine with me. My thing is just let's try to make the hitting be the shortstop. You've got
a lot more flexibility on the hitting side than the pitching side. On the hitting side, you've got all these different ways that you can get it.
But that's
pitching. I know.
But that's partly why I want the pitching.
That's
you know what I mean.
And that's why year after year after year they end up going hitting instead of pitching,
because it's always the case, right?
You just got to pay. You just got to pay the freight on pitching,
right? You sign Josh Donaldson because you couldn't get Zach Wheeler,
right?
Basically,
that's right.
The last thing I had was just a right-handed relief pitcher.
Yeah. And I would do a reliever. I don't really care that much about right-handed versus left-handed, but
my thing about right-handed is I trust Caleb Thielbar as a solid setup man at this point, and I do have very high hopes. I mean, I feel like we've talked about Giovanni Moran more than anyone in the world over the last 2 years, but I think he's legit.
Yeah, I get you too.
And so if you have those two as your lefties, now if you found me a good lefty who's willing to sign here, I'm not going to be like, no.
Right.
But I would just focus on right-handed relievers. The good thing is in free agency, there's always a dozen of them that would fit.
Yes.
My sort of cutoff or baseline for that is Michael Fulmer or better. Which, by the way, they could just re-sign Michael Fulmer, and I would say box checked. Great, let's go.
Right. Yeah, I'd like it's got to be a seventh inning guy.
Yeah, that's about right.
That's right.
So yeah, I mean David Robertson,
seventh
Michael
or
Fulmer,
maybe eighth.
Seth Lugo, old friend Trevor May.
Right.
I don't know. There's a million guys.
Right. I would also say that this similar to sort of the starting rotation now. I take a look at. I'm trying to remember what our expectations were for this bullpen going into opening day. And then considering, especially after Taylor Rogers was traded.
It wasn't great.
It wasn't great.
Because we moaned all offseason, how can Joe Smith be their big bullpen pickup? And that proved correct.
And we were worried about Duffy, who we were right to be worried about, right? We were worried about Taylor Rogers.
True. Actually. He just turned into Pagan, which we were very worried about.
We were worried about Taylor Rogers. He ended up getting traded.
And
so it didn't
nobody
really
realized that Duran was going to be
quite that good, right? So again, I kind of take a look at the bullpen the same way I look at the rotation, which is like, yeah, I'd like to have more relievers. I'd like to have, and if we're going to get any, it's got to be a good one. I mean, not top flight, like I'm looking for starting pitchers, right? I need to look for like you said, Michael Fulmer or that level or better, and there's 8 of them.
But similar to what we were talking about, that they're more likely to take your approach. I think on this, in their mind, they have Duran, who's amazing.
Yep.
They have Griffin Jacks, who's now emerged as a reliable setup man. They traded for Jorge Lopez because they thought he could be the closer.
I agree with you.
And they have Jorge Alcala, who they still think very highly of coming back.
Yeah, I wonder how much confidence they have in Alcala.
Well, that's my thing. It's similar to my argument about the rotation,
right?
Which is, if Lopez is the guy you thought you were trading for, and Jorge Alcala is healthy, then you probably don't need to sign.
Right.
But I'm not going off that as our baseline on either front, let alone combined. And so that's why I think, similar to my argument for the rotation, let's over prepare for on the pitching front. So I mean, I think we're mostly on the same page. I think so. What it comes down to is you're trying to, and this is funny given what you are actually an expert at in your real life, which is project managing and rolling out stuff and all that.
Right.
Which is you're trying to get the functionality up to a point where you can launch it publicly and not be ashamed of it and have it function day to day well enough to add users and have people not cancel their subscription instantly. And I'm saying that's all great. But if it's not actually a good product, I don't want it.
Yeah, I would say that's that. I think that there's a difference in sort of philosophy on that one. I'd say I'm looking more to flex with the market as opposed to sort of identifying surgical things. I'd say we are agreeing though a lot on you go big or you go home. Like there are certain areas where we can either say, okay, this
don't just do it to do
this
it.
piece makes sense and it's not going to cost you much, right? Like the right fielder or the right-handed outfielder or a 7th inning reliever or like or a left-handed hitting catcher or just any other catcher. Like none of those are going to cost you a ton, and you need to get those pieces in place, right? But for the most of the rest of part, we're saying go big or go home. on this stuff.
Go big
right?
or move to the next place you can go big.
Right, that's right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Go big at shortstop,
right.
and if you can't do that, go big at starting pitcher.
Or catcher.
And if you can't do that, then go big at Wilson
or first
Contreras.
base. Right, yeah.
Absolutely.
Like, you've got to go, we got to come out of this with some pieces that you feel comfortable leading this team for the next 3 to 4 years.
They
probably
need some tentpole players, and that's never been more apparent than watching these two World Series teams, by the way, who have more star power than you will ever see the Twins ever have in their entire lives. And, you can get caught up in that. But yeah, I think the worst thing they could do is very little and enter the season having spent $25 million of the $60 million to get them back to the payroll. Right. I don't think they're going to do that because that is such an obvious lack of effort or lack of whatever that everyone would. I mean, there'll be 9 people at the game.
Yeah, but they need to take a couple of big risks.
The second worst thing they could do is look at all these needs, which there are 5 or 6 of them, and say we got about $60 million. Let's just spend $8 million on each of them.
Yeah, right.
And that it checks all the boxes. But if you don't have Correa anymore and you've got Elvis Andrus at shortstop and all you did was sign, Christian Vasquez again, you probably spent the 50 or 60 million because they have enough needs for that. But you're rolling out a team that is going to be projected to go like 82 and 80. Yeah. And that's not my goal anymore with this whole thing. Yeah. I think that's what this, I feel like in the early days of this podcast was about us disagreeing about a lot of stuff and arguing about it. Then in the middle days of this podcast, it became about us disagreeing about stuff, realizing about halfway through we actually kind of agreed on half of it.
That's about right.
And then the current days of this podcast, I was going to say the late days of this podcast, but maybe that's discouraging to say that.
Maybe we're still in the early days.
Has been about us agreeing about a lot, but finding that there are like a couple of key kind of inflection points that we see it differently on, and then trying to kind of get a handle on that. I think that's a great way to do it because nothing you named and nothing I named had either of us going, well, that's not how I would approach it. But it's more just how much weight are you giving to each thing or how much are you prioritizing each thing? Yep. Is that a healthy progression of a relationship?
I guess so.
Screaming initially, then screaming but realizing we're both wrong and both right, and then at the end just picking very fine spots to pick on each other about.
Sounds like my fights with my wife. That's exactly what it sounds
I'm a little worried about that, actually.
All right. We do have one programming announcement. I think last week we talked about releasing something about Do-Hyung Park for our Patreon.
Yes.
That has actually been pushed off because he's got to go cover the World Series. We couldn't record yesterday morning. He had to go cover the World Series Game 1 and Game 2. Now I'm going to be out of town for games for the next
we'll have
game.
Doan
we will have Doan
soon.
for his Jeopardy stuff on the Patreon as well.
Let's be honest. We thought he was going to win.
We did.
Second place on Jeopardy. We'll wait to have you on the show. We could have anybody who gets second place. No, I'm just kidding. We had a watch party for him.
It was great.
Really fun.
Yeah, it was fun.
It was fun to watch his friends, who are all look like Instagram models, interact with you and Phil Miller.
Because they're all 20 years younger than us. Right. And they're just by definition, the older you get, the more you're like, oh yeah, everybody at 20-something is attractive.
Yeah. How come that didn't work for me, though, when I was 20?
You don't recognize that when you're in your 20s.
Right. It was all these people came in, and I'm like, man, Doe knows these people? I'm like, damn, Doe's pretty cool. But then I went, no, Doe also knows me, you, and Phil Miller. So he's not that cool. But I just imagine, like, some of these people walking in. We had at the Loon upstairs. And I just imagine them walking in because Doe's probably like, yeah, a bunch of my friends from work and stuff are getting together. Come on by the Loon. And they walked in, they went, oh, this is the crew he's hanging out with? Just a bunch of middle-aged dudes who are just wearing, sweatshirts and different Stan Smith Adidas models? Like, what's going on here? I was talking to Phil about that. For a whole year, I wore the green Stan Smiths, and he wore the red Stan Smith because he's a Utah Utes fan. And I just imagine how many people saw us walking around Target Field together and thought, oh, that's so cute. A father and son, neither of whom have any style whatsoever, wearing the green and the red version of the same shoe that's been around for 50 years. Anyway, okay. So next month, when he comes back from the World Series, Doe will be on.
Yes,
let's chat about it.
And when I come back from the World Series.
If you come back from the World Series.
That's true.
You might come back. Don't come back in a body bag, John.
If there's any breaking news, we will have the podcast stuff with us. We could do something like that. It'll probably be on the Patreon.
In the meantime, to BetterHelp, to Trade Coffee, and of course, to 7th Avenue. Don't go 7th Street. That'll poison you. 7th Avenue Pizza. Ooh, I might have that for lunch today now that I'm thinking about it. All right, bye.
Gleeman.